It says we're live. Okay.
Matt, should we wait 30 seconds or should the board meeting
I'm sorry,
start now?
everybody. We need to wait.
We are
because
now
I'm
on.
not sure what's happening. Okay, we're on.
I
Okay,
launched it.
great.
I see it.
We're good to go, everybody, if you can see it.
Yep. Okay. I will call the meeting to order. I'd like to welcome the public and call the meeting to order. Oh, I'm hearing myself. That's bad. Hold on. With a 20-second delay. Okay. Let's see. Special meeting is conducted via teleconference. Interested parties, members of the public may connect to and participate in the meeting using instructions that are posted on the webpage, the home board, the LGUSD homepage, which links to Agenda Online. If you wish to make a comment, there is a Google form, which is linked to our website. And anyone is welcome so long as they're on an agenda item. That's the requirement for special board meetings. If a comment's received after a public comment on the agenda item has been closed, it will be considered written communication and forwarded to the board. Comments may not exceed 3 minutes in length. It takes longer than 3 minutes to read aloud. The remainder will be considered written communication and forwarded to the governing board. I'd like to welcome everyone here to this special meeting. Michelle, would you like to do roll call?
Yes, please. Trustee Neumer.
Here.
Trustee Monk.
Here. Here. I don't know if you can hear me.
Trustee Parsons.
Here.
Trustee Snyder.
Here.
Did you miss me? I'm here.
You did miss John.
That's okay.
We got you. Thank you.
I thought for him.
Do I have a motion to approve or amend the agenda?
I'll motion to approve the agenda.
Oh, second motion. I heard Peter. Sure.
Trustee Neumer.
Aye.
Trustee Monk.
Aye.
Trustee Kunzman.
Aye.
Trustee Parsons.
Aye.
Trustee Snyder.
Aye. All right, moving on to consent agenda. Information concerning the consent items listed below has been forwarded to each board member prior to the meeting for study. All items on the consent will be approved with one motion, which is not debatable and which requires unanimous vote for passage. If a member of the board, the superintendent, or the public so requests, an item will be removed from the section and placed in the regular order of business following approval of the consent agenda. Did
I'll
we
make
have
a
any?
motion to approve.
First, Michelle, do we have any public comment on the consent agenda?
Were submitted on the consent agenda.
All right. Thank you. So John has a motion to approve. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Stephen, thank you.
Neumer.
Aye.
Trustee Monk.
Aye.
Trustee Kunzman.
Aye.
Trustee Parsons.
Aye.
Trustee Snyder.
Aye. Thank you. Strategic initiatives, reopening school update.
Did we miss the flag?
Oh, did we not have a,
I don't even
see
see it.
it on the agenda?
Special board meetings. We don't usually.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we went looking for a flag for a while before everybody came on. So, okay.
Oops. All right, Paul, is this you? You're on mute.
Okay, there we go. I'll start us off here. I wanted to mention that for the past month, The staff work groups have put in hundreds of hours brainstorming and preparing draft plans for reopening of our schools. And I have stated in every meeting I've attended my own preference for in-person instruction to the greatest extent possible. And also, it must be acknowledged that the COVID virus continues to be unpredictable. The Santa Clara Public Department of Health dashboard has exploded during the past weeks with a dramatic rise in new cases, and hospitalizations are now trending upward. And to put this into perspective, there has been a 500% increase in cases over the past month. And just in the past week, records have been set for new cases in Santa Clara County. And Tim, I wanted to show you, ask you if you could put up the one slide. Okay, this is a copy of the slide from the Department of Health, which shows the upward dramatic movement of new case counts in Santa Clara County. And you can take that off, Tim. Okay, thank you. And in light of these developments, our draft plans have now changed many times over, and also in the last week alone. And as superintendent, I am advocating a careful phase-in approach to begin school in August for the health and safety of all of our students and our staff. And the three phases would be as follows. August 13th, we open school here in the school district and open remotely, at least through Labor Day. And we will continue to monitor the county health dashboard. And when the trends stabilize and are on a downward trajectory, we will look at actively transitioning back to campus. And so should those trends materialize, which shows virus stabilization, then we would move into our phase one. And the phase one would be a combination of hybrid 2-day with remote learning and classes reduced by 50% across the district. And then phase two would include all students on campus every day through 12 or 1 p.m. in strict, stable cohort groups, followed by virtual electives in the afternoon. I wanted to mention that it's been said that the only certainty during this time is uncertainty. And it's been very stressful for the entire community, the staff, and families that we know. And life as we have known the last 4 months is entirely different, and schools are no exception. I was on a call this afternoon with all the county superintendents in Santa Clara County, and a lot of worries regarding the start of school. It appears most school districts are taking a methodical approach to beginning school, with most beginning distance learning and then graduating into a phased approach. Just a lot of concern, and every call that we do, the county health department is online today. They reported that they're concerned about the current trends in Santa Clara County. And they are anticipating possibly some state orders that will come out within the next couple of days. Also, there was a little bit of talk of anticipated school orders from the governor in the next couple of days. And so we're continuing to monitor the situation, but we really advocate a careful and cautious reopening. And I wanted to mention that we have a solid plan to go forward. And this evening, we're going to talk about what the remote open would look like, what phase one would look like, and what phase two would look like. And the plan is tomorrow to send a communication to all district families with detailed information. And I know that Misty and Arcia were going to mention this, but in the communication tomorrow will be a survey for parents with an intent to return with some other questions as well. I wanted to mention we are in close contact with the high school district and doing our best to coordinate schedules with them as well. So with that, that's the introduction. And I wanted to mention that our number one priority is the health and safety of our students. That's a higher priority than the actual academics. And it is the highest priority for our staff who are in the trenches with the students to make sure that they are all safe and protected. And this evening, I guess it's actually later afternoon, Misty Hartoon, who is our Director of Student Services, and Arcia DeRosti, our Director of Curriculum, are going to give a joint presentation where they're going to detail what the plans are from beginning with the remote learning through phase 1 and phase 2, and also provide information on cleaning of classrooms and our analysis of our ventilation systems and so forth. It's been a real team effort. And just before we got on the call for the board meeting, Thomas Latier, our Director of Maintenance, was talking about the work that the contractors are doing for the commission study on the ventilation and all the things that they are working on and improving. So it's definitely a team effort. And with that, we're going to jump in. So
Paul,
Misty
a
and
clarifying
Arcia, oh,
question.
yes,
Since you had mentioned the high school, I know they had a board meeting just 2 hours ago. Do we have any sense of any decisions they might have made?
Mike Grove promised that he was going to text me, and so they may still be in their meeting. And if I hear anything, I'll announce it later in our meeting as well. They're grappling with the same issues and what to do with their reopen. Okay, so Misty and Arcia.
All right, so Paul gave a good overview of information we're going to present tonight. And we wanted to reiterate from our perspective in facilitating conversations that in addition to all of the input from people on the committees and separate meetings and subgroups and things that have been held and discussed, input from the community that's come in, we are actively monitoring information from the health department around the number of current cases, capacity of healthcare systems, our availability and use of widespread testing, including for in the district, and our ability to quickly and effectively isolate or quarantine. So our plans around stable cohorts and aspects of that have been a big part of our conversation. And you'll see caveats throughout the presentation tonight in the little side sticky notes or in notations on the page that all of these plans are pending things that could change based on the health system and the health status of COVID-19. We've had tremendous input from staff. Our work groups have really been working on how students would return to campus. It wasn't so much about the exact day or date that students would return. That has been a continued conversation with the cabinet and with the county and with the health department. We have really been cognizant of the fact that when we open campuses, we want to be able to stay open. We don't want to open and have to close and open and have to close to the greatest extent that we can be consistent and set a program to be able to sustain the program for students. That's what we would like to do. Tonight, as we're previewing the phases and the plans, it's in the 3 parts that Paul mentioned. So some of the next few slides will be review to what Paul just said in his introduction. that August 13th, we will open remotely. We want to be clear from the very beginning of the presentation on behalf of the staff that's participated, on behalf of the staff that's given input. Our teachers want to be back on campus. They want to be with kids, and our administration and our families also want to be back. We absolutely recognize that. It has not been an easy or comfortable decision to make, but we want to reiterate that health and safety are our priority, and that it's the realities of COVID-19 that are going to allow us to reopen. And when we do, we feel really comfortable, confident that the plans and the input from the staff that were developed and that we're continuing to enhance are going to be strong and solid for our students.
Okay. So again, I do want to reiterate, it's been said a couple different times, but these are our current plans, but everything subject to change at any time, and have changed several times constantly since March 13th, and actually a little bit before. But like what has been said before, on August 13th, we will open schools on our normal schedule, but we will do it remotely. We are currently exploring having certain groups of students, targeted groups, returning at that time, but we have not fleshed those plans out completely. Should everything remain stable or there's a downward trajectory and the virus spread is stabilizing, on September 8th, we will begin phase 1 of our in-person opening, and then continuing to monitor the dashboard and the downward trajectory. We would then enter phase 2 of our in-person opening at the end of October. So some information that we'd like to acknowledge here. We have worked extensively with our staff, all areas of our staff. And tomorrow we will be providing the community wide information on our website, including this presentation and a survey that will ask parents their intent to return, as well as childcare needs. And we're working with the Los Gatos Rec Department to provide childcare for families, as well as technology needs for families, since we will be starting remote. The website will have a FAQ document that will be that is dynamic, so it will be continuously updated and modified for families to always look back to.
I think it's important to note that we're not done working with staff. The staff today, tomorrow, Thursday, we have meetings with staff. Our work groups are reconvening on the 22nd and or the 29th. To continue to review and enhance the plans that we would move forward with in any phase or any stage of this. When we begin in person, when that does happen, we wanted to share that we will be focused on 3 major areas as outlined by the county guidance, and those are prevention, monitoring, and response. Many of our plan elements you'll see are focused on minimizing the number of people who are coming into contact with each other, maximizing our space, reducing time that we're spending in close proximity to others, especially in larger groups, and measures to minimize dispersion of droplets and aerosols, down to details such as we have turned off hand dryers in the restrooms and are going to paper hand drying pieces to minimize that type of aerosol experience. Health screenings will be a component of our program when we come back on campus. And really at this point, anytime anyone is coming on campus, we're beginning to implement, and we'll consistently implement symptom screenings, both through questionnaires, which we'll review tonight, and through at least initially non-contact temperature screenings at our gates. And any response, we have to be prepared for the possible incidents that there is exposure in a classroom, or that someone is diagnosed with a COVID-19, and we would need to have a response to that. That will be in direct alignment with the county health processes for notification to families, the community, how we would close a cohort, what we would do for quarantine or isolating.
Okay, so when we do return, there are some guidelines we are going to have in place for safety. And first and foremost, we are going to limit or eliminate the number of visitors we have on campus. That includes things like, oh, so-and-so forgot their lunch. I need to drop it off at the office. Those type of things won't be feasible for safety reasons. We will have pretty stringent arrival and departure procedures. Families will be assigned a gate of entrance that will be color coded and will be segmented by, your gate will be by your last name. The arrival times will be staggered to avoid any backups at the gates or crowd overcrowding. When students are dropped off, the drivers should remain in the vehicles, and every adult on campus will be required to wear a face covering at all times. So again, to reiterate, face coverings, everyone will be wearing a face covering when coming in or off or around our campuses. Anytime the students are outside of their core room, except for when eating and drinking or in a PE lesson in which they'll be spaced out. We cannot fully require, nor can we remove a student for not wearing a mask, but all of our students will be strongly requested to wear a face covering. And we're really going to be asking for a community effort here to help us all ensure the collective safety of this community and our teaching staff and our students. And we're going to ask for parents to support our vigilance with the masks.
So we will ask the middle school students, they will be required to wear a face mask unless there's a very specific health need that we would need to address. Elementary students, we understand. For younger students, there may be some more tolerating elements we'd have to consider and work on and build up to. But for middle school students, we would ask. So to the extent that even now that we're starting remotely, that families can support wearing a mask, practicing a mask, building stamina around a mask. So in the event of when we begin, that is more of a normal experience for children, that would be very helpful.
Hey, Misty, can you mention the training videos that are being put together?
Yeah, so we have started with our school nurse doing some videos. We have had one teacher so far help submit a video just talking about wearing masks on campus, what that looks like, how we're staying 6 feet apart, how we're not running up and hugging our friends as much anymore. We're working with a group of people who will come in so we can demonstrate different types of masks and be able to show what that looks like for students so that when the time comes, it's not brand new information. We're going to have a lot of new routines and new systems to teach when they're on campus. So to the greatest extent possible that we can around hand hygiene, cough and sneeze etiquette, the mask wearing components, we want to build in and front load as much information going out to the community through videos as possible to share with the children. Specifically to our health screenings, we really want to look at it. We're going to implement a three-part health screening. We're going to ask parents and caregivers to monitor students at home for all symptoms. And if people are sick, more than ever, we want them to honor the fact that someone's sick and stay home. So in the past, we have all had that experience that we say, oh, it's not that bad. You don't have a temperature, your stomach hurts, go to school. We're going to ask that we change that language and conversation, and that if there's any symptoms that someone's experiencing, we're going to reiterate that students stay home from school. Initially, we will conduct temperature checks with non-contact thermometers at the gate. We have been developing training pieces around that process and identifying the appropriate PPE so the staff at gates is appropriately protected. But any way that we can add in at least one more layer initially of coming back to campus of protection and monitoring to reduce the incidence that someone who's sick goes into a classroom to spend the day. We want to be conscientious about that. if someone at the gate has a red flag, it won't be just out at the gate. You have to turn around and go home. We will conduct secondary check-ins with people in the health office. And then in class, the county has indicated that, and you may have seen some of these in activities that you're doing in your own lives, that you need to answer these questions before you enter a business or before you enter someplace. We'll be having the same kinds of questions we need to answer here. This is the format that would go home to parents to ask them to do that first step in the home screening. And then we would have a kid appropriate version, depending on the grade level and the age of the students. We will have a developmentally appropriate version of the questionnaire for students to answer at school as well, so that if anything comes up as an area of concern, we can follow up on it right away. These are the symptoms. You saw them on the last slide at the bottom of the box. These are the symptoms that students will be asked to go home and stay home. And under county guidance, if there are symptoms that cannot be explained by another reason that can be documented, then the request from the school will be to go and get a COVID test and be able to provide a negative result, or get a note from your doctor that you didn't merit testing because you have another reason for those things happening. For example, we have students with documented migraines. If they have a headache and we know that they have migraines and we know that screen time causes some of those migraines, we would work with that family and their medical provider to monitor together. All right.
Okay. We'll start to detail now what school will look like starting in August and then into our phase-in approach. First thing I want to start with, school will look and feel a lot more similar to what it usually is in the fall. We will have our normal assessment procedures in place, and we'll work to do some of our screenings remotely, our assessment screenings. Grades will be back to the way we normally have them, and assignments will be given, and scores will be tracked, as well as attendance will be taken daily. We'll have protocols, just like in school where we have dress code and protocols or norms, behavioral norms. We'll have those for Zoom as well, because a lot of the instruction, at least early on, will be through the Zoom platform. So general school rules will apply, dress codes will apply. You won't be able to eat during a meeting. You'll have to be attentive, just like the expectations in a classroom. And your camera, we're going to ask our students to leave their cameras on so that we can see the level, at least try to gauge the level at which they're engaging with the content.
Our plans have really focused on the use of stable cohorts, whether it's in the remote phase, remote part of the plan initially, phase 1 or phase 2, by really trying to build those stable cohorts consistently. Under the guidance, we're able to offer and consider elements such as play equipment. So asking students to sit in their desk for 4 hours in 3rd grade on a half day without some opportunity to go outside in an outdoor space and move around and have some balls or toys or things that they're engaging with seemed daunting. Under the current guidance and additional inquiries with the health department, in a stable cohort, students in that cohort could share equipment that can be easily cleaned and sanitized, which lets us then offer outdoor activities. It lets us use shared science lab materials within a stable cohort. It lets us continue to build around our outdoor spaces for learning activities. In our plans, we've maintained, I shouldn't say we've continued to ensure that the fields are open so that campuses can use them throughout the day. And teachers will be able to have students in those stable cohorts do group work with appropriate social distancing.
Okay, so part of our plan, even when we do return in person, is to keep our electives and specials, what we call the special activities, remote. The reason for this is exactly to support what Misty just said. we need to be able to maintain stable cohorts of students with their teacher and not have cohorts mixing for any reason, both for contact tracing so that we know should we have a case, we know exactly where it came from and we can quarantine just one section or one class. And it's also to keep the spread, the potential spread of the virus from happening. So if we have, for example, an art teacher that at the elementary level that goes into every class in the entire district, which she does, she would then be exposed to every single cohort. And should she be carrying the virus, she would then be exposing every single cohort in the district, in the elementary level of the district with the virus. So we will be keeping our specials and electives separated and remote even when we return.
Another piece of that is the guidance from the county and the health department very specifically indicated we are not allowed to hold music courses such as choir, band, or even theater performance type courses in person for the instructional component, the playing and the singing of those activities. That would apply K-8 for us.
So when I talked about electives or specials, so every afternoon, we've set it up so that every afternoon at the elementary level, the students will come home. Well, in the afternoon, if they've come to school when they get home, or if they're already home for remote learning, they will have a 5-day rotation of one of these activities to do, mostly synchronous. Library, they'll be able to go visit the librarian and have read alouds. The credentialed PE teacher will be demonstrating lessons.
Could you take a moment to just explain synchronous versus asynchronous? A lot of people don't know what that means.
Sure. Synchronous would be live, like what we have right now, live with camera, but asynchronous would be like a previously recorded lesson. So, and both have advantages and disadvantages. A previously recorded lesson provides access in some ways because a student that can't see it live could just watch it at a later time. But these will be mostly synchronous here. So PE with a credentialed teacher, every grade level on a 5-day rotation. Art with either a docent or our credentialed art teacher. Music, and the SEL check-in, which will not be, this one will not be synchronous, this will be asynchronous, or our students on the remote, our teachers on the remote platform will pull from a bank of SEL lessons and put something together with students, in addition to a form that students will fill out saying something along the lines of how are you feeling today, or what challenges are you facing, or what struggles are you having. This will be monitored by our counseling department, and students that we're concerned about can be followed up with.
We should note that the check-ins with teacher, our library staff is going to work with teachers to either identify books we know students like to read, or provide a variety of books that would be able to go to the classroom for students to be able to do book checkouts still. And they'll collaborate with the teaching staff to make that happen.
This is the 5-day rotation that I was just alluding to. So kinder, since it's always been a half day, will not be included in these rotations, but first, second, third, fourth, and fifth grade would be, and that would be the schedule of what our students would receive in the afternoon, both in remote and when we return in phase 1 and 2. That's the elementary level.
At the middle school level, we will hold electives remotely, and in our AB model, whether it's remote or in phase 1. We will also hold pieces of our physical education program remotely. We've identified ways to include physical education that can include both physical and mental health components, provide some content instruction with our PE staff, and then also include interactive PE things to do on the remote platforms for 6 through 8. Before we go to the next slide, we want to say, as we start to talk about these parts of the programs, because in both the elementary school that Arcia is going to speak to, and then when I talk to the middle school, we want to just try to distinguish, if you can help distinguish or clarify as you're thinking about these. What we did in the spring, we called remote learning. We said it was remote learning. That's how we termed it. We had remote learning reporter. That was our language. In reality, and I think we shared with you in the spring board meeting, I think we called it crisis teaching. It was crisis learning, and it was an immediate switch from a Friday to a Monday, and we were trying to build all new learning experiences. Since that time, to the staff's credit, in terms of professional development, commitment, alterations, adjustments, planning input, our PD platforms, moving into what we're still calling remote learning. It's a much more robust program than what you would have seen in March or April of last year. And so we just want to reiterate that while we're calling it the same thing, there are nuances of our remote programs that are different and elevated from where we were in the midst of the initial parts of this health crisis.
So here is what it would look like. And so since we are starting remote at the elementary level, every morning, all of our classrooms will have a connection. These are morning meetings focused primarily on SEL, but our teachers will integrate a lot of academic content in here too, whether that's a calendar at the lower primary. I've seen teachers turn this into number talks. And it could be other academic discussions, book discussions, stuff like that. And then from 9 to 11:30, each student will be guaranteed 60 minutes of synchronous instruction, and where attendance will be taken, and this will focus on core content, ELA, English Language Arts, and math. The teacher may decide during this window to break the class up into half or into smaller groups to do more targeted instruction, but all the students will get 60 minutes of synchronous time. Teacher may create activities in which small groups of students are placed together for discussion or for preparing presentations, any number of ways. From 11:30 to 12, teachers are going to provide what's called directed small group time. These will not be optional. Teachers will assign smaller groups of students to come and get additional targeted instruction on what they're needed. It won't be every student. It may be 5, 4, 3, 6 students at a time. And every day could be a different group. But if a teacher asks for a student to be present during a small group time, then the student needs to be present. And then we will wrap up the day with another class check-in. Could be an afternoon meeting, could be some of those other academic pieces I was talking about, a read aloud, a number talk, or it could be front loading the information or the content for the next day, or giving kids an opportunity to understand what's coming. The PM, the afternoon, will be on that previous slide I just shared for the elementary level, where students will have one of their electives or specials in the afternoon. Wednesday, off the bat, will be for teachers to create all of that remote content for planning, for professional development, for collaboration amongst teachers to create the most robust content possible for all the remote experiences that students will be having.
Students will have asynchronous activities, whether it's projects to work on, use of our other platforms, whether it's Reading A to Z, Achieve 3000 for students,
IXO.
and connections. Students will still have assignments and instruction to do on that day. It just will not be live meetings with their teacher that day.
Okay, so phase 1, when we are ready to return, this is what it will look like. Students will, we're going to do what's called an A-B Monday, alternating with Wednesday off, half day. So half their class would come, in first through third, half the class would come with that staggered arrival, and then come for 4 hours of instruction, and then a staggered dismissal. And then the students will go home, and then be able to access their special, which I previously mentioned, remotely. In the upper grades, it'll be a teeny bit longer, but follow that same model, where half the class would come one day for half day, then the other half would come the next day for half a day. Wednesday would be off, and then we would alternate again on Thursday and Friday. We can go to the next, yeah. When we're ready to ramp up to the next phase, we'll have all the kids come every day for half days, again, maintaining the afternoon for remote specials electives that I mentioned previously. And that's what the schedule would look like. Kinder would be a little different. Again, these students are brand new to school, some of them brand new to school altogether. We would start, when we're ready to phase in with the kinder, we would start with an A and a B group. They would all come every day, but there would be 2 hours a day. And then the teacher would provide some instructional materials for the student to do for about an hour at home. The electives and specials schedule wouldn't apply to kindergarten. When we're ready to ramp it up to phase 2 for kindergarten, we would have all the students come for 3 hours a day.
At the middle school, as we start in a remote model, we're going to mimic what would be in phase 1 so that students are used to that schedule and routine of which days they have their content courses and which days they have elective courses. So they will have live instruction initially with teachers on 4 days of the week, because they'll have 1 day for their core content and 1 day for electives in the week. So our AB would be Monday, Thursday for example, would be content, Tuesday, Friday electives, or vice versa. So students would be split so we can mimic exactly what our phase 1 would look like. It'll support us if we are able to bring in small groups of students for something targeted in vulnerable student groups. It will support us in making a smooth transition and not needing to shuffle classes in PowerSchool or in the structure and rescheduling, which was an improvement requested from last time, to have a consistent schedule across each model that we looked at. We're still working with our middle school group. We have our next meeting on the 22nd, and we're meeting again on the 29th. So exact minutes are still being confirmed and reviewed with the team. But typically the students would go through a 5-period day, 2 days of the week, and then they would have 1 or 2, depending on the student's course enrollment, on the other 2 days a week, so that we can maintain our elective program in both music and language. We can support our 6th graders in a transition, and we can maintain a flex time component for direct instruction and support for students who might need that. When we are ready to move out of a remote phase, the model looks very, very similar so that it's consistent for students. The minutes do look slightly different so that we have time to implement the staggered start and have students come to class to stay with one teacher. So whoever their first period is, for example, on their schedule, they would report to their first period class. And for that entire day, they would stay in that room. And in a moment, I'll explain to you the concept of the core co-teaching model, so that our teachers stay with one group of 30 students maximum between the 2 days, and that our students are in smaller cohorts and not mixing in between spaces throughout the day either. But we can ensure that every student's getting all of their core content and maintaining their elective programs. The co-teaching idea, originally I won't say originally because there have been so many renditions. At one point, one of our considerations was having teachers rotate, leaving students stable in one classroom and having teachers rotate between classes. But as our CEO was just explaining with a specials teacher, then that teacher becomes the pivot point for what's going on in between each of the spaces. And rather than, should the need arise to close a cohort, then we would need to close 150 students' academic program, and our teachers would be in a position of exposures to 150 children with families outside of school that are doing different things, and that domino effect of exposure. So by cohorting and then going to a co-teaching idea, we can have the teachers Zoom with each other across classrooms, project a teacher on the screen to address the fact that we still want expert teachers in their subject of instruction and credential to provide the instruction for staff, for the students. So you can have an English teacher on the screen using English content, and everyone can participate in that, with the other teachers on the team being able to moderate and facilitate conversations back and forth. We can continue and still use science labs this way. A science teacher could demonstrate from their classroom in their science room with all of the equipment at their lab station and their demo station in the front of the classroom. And the students can have pieces of that lab in the other rooms around the campus to be able to engage and participate in a lab experience. Whereas in a teacher rotation model, the teacher would have had to leave the science classroom and go teach a science lesson in another room that could be a math classroom, a PE classroom, or the library, depending on where we have student groups set up for instructional spaces. So this allows teachers to keep their content area and use their teaching space effectively. We can implement, in this model, we can implement a health component of our PE classes, not so much the outside motor aspects, but we'll be able to do that with assignments and supports for the remote days when students aren't on campus. We spent a lot of time and feedback in both ends of the spectrum around using a primarily asynchronous model, so students could watch the material on their Chromebook, and what the limitations and advantages were for that kind of interaction, to the model that we're presenting tonight, where there would be opportunities for that live presentation of a lesson and facilitated conversation between spaces. We looked at advantage.
Just clarifying.
Yeah, thank you.
It's on the classroom projected screen. They're not looking at their own Chromebook. So they're looking at a large projection with the co-teacher helping facilitate.
Yes, thank you. That's a good clarification. We had a lot of conversation around the advantages of many models that we looked at from the very beginning of the task force through the end of what we're coming to today. To share with you, there have been pros and cons to everything that we have considered. In terms of the core co-teaching advantages, we feel like this offers an opportunity. We're coming back in a very different structure. We're coming back after a very significant disruption, that this would allow us to build deeper relationships with a single group of students. A staff member could essentially be like a mentor to that group of students and develop those connections. It helps with a stable and safer exposure concern. We can certainly leverage project-based learning opportunities, which has been identified as a key thing we want to move forward in the district. If you're collaboratively teaching with your core, you could do a history English project together. You could do a total 4 content project-based learning assignment together. We can balance that live and not live interaction. There will be times that not live interaction needs to happen. We're looking at math models that maybe have some asynchronous, the instructional component would be more of a flipped model that could have an asynchronous presentation, and then the time in this class could be really around clarification, digging deeper, answering and supporting students who need additional help during that time. It provides non-content teachers the same lesson. I think we spent some time talking about if I'll just totally own it for myself. I am an English person more at heart than a math person. And so to teach a math content area, people who know me well would know exactly which unit I don't want to teach, that I would be struggling with. And so I wouldn't have to own that instruction. So that my math teacher on my team would be teaching it, and I would be basically a co-learner with my students and be able to model questioning and make sure my students' questions are being answered by their math teacher. We can maintain our math pathway options. We are having notable conversations around, and I think over time, some of you have even posed questions to us around this model that we're looking at is a decrease in instructional minutes. Whether it's remote or whether it's in phase one, there are less instructional minutes on campus directly in front of teachers. We recognize that that is absolutely going to have an impact on the pacing of our courses, how much content, which standards we're getting to and through. And so we are working on ways to identify super standards. It won't just be in math, it'll be an issue across every grade level, every content area. But we're keenly aware of our math pathway options. And I think Paul alluded to at the beginning, ARCIA is reaching out to our high school counterparts to do articulation, especially with our math department, because those are high school based courses that we offer. We'll also need to do that with our foreign language, with our world language courses. Those are also high school courses. We're able to look at dedicated social emotional learning aspects for all 3 grade levels to be able to build strong classroom culture and really kind of develop a core culture that we can leverage with our teams and our students. We did plan for in phase 1 the ability to split lunches, so our students at a middle school can get outside and eat lunch socially distanced around the campus and be able to supervise that. Allowing teachers still to have their lunchtime. And we can limit any closure impact because we have now gone from 150 to one group of 30, 32, 26, depending on the numbers and what periods we're looking at, needing to isolate should something come up as an issue. When we get to phase 2, we would want to maintain, assuming that things are going well, and we've already reiterated with our middle school team that on August 13th, our work group efforts they cannot stop. We'll need to continue meeting into the fall to talk about how the core teaching component is going, what's happening with the content, because in phase 2, if we're bringing all the students back, we can follow a 5-period block rotation, 5 mornings a week. So students are getting essentially the equivalent of the instructional minutes that we had previously. We won't be able to get to those instructional minutes until we can enter phase 2. And so we want to continue to plan for that and what that would look like. What do we need to continue to adapt and strengthen around a co-teaching model? But this would get all students back on campus for more instructional time at phase 2. It would also align us with the elementary district, or not that we are the elementary, with the elementary schools in terms of K-1-8 would all be on that half-day model for families to be consistent across those programs. All right, Tim, this is you.
Okay. As Misty and RC have been sharing with you these different plans, it's obvious that there's a lot of technology infrastructure and technology planning that needs to happen. So I wanted to share with you a few of the considerations we've taken to move that forward. First off, in remote learning, we are acquiring additional teacher remote support software so that we can support teachers' laptops when they're remote from their home, things of that sort. We're also investigating some additional curricular and tool software for teachers to use in their instruction and in the delivery of their instruction. And we're also moving forward with a improved Zoom style security, where software such as GoGuardian now has Zoom type of video conferencing feature built into it. And we're looking at expanding the use of GoGuardian and being able to utilize their Zoom style or their video conferencing because it offers even more security to avoid things like Zoom bombing. The district, we're preparing to loan out Chromebooks to families on an as-need basis. And then the co-teaching that Misty was referring to is obviously going to be very demanding on the Fisher network. And fortunately, we've planned to install a complete new network for Fisher, fiber, some copper, wireless access points, switches, etc., at Fisher, and that project is already underway. All teachers, by the time school starts, should have new laptops, MacBook Air laptops, so they should be in good shape for delivering any kind of remote learning or co-teaching. And we're looking at a variety of ways to support audio, such as wired pendant microphones for teachers, because if the video is great, but you can't hear what the teacher is saying, the video doesn't do you much good. So audio is equally as important, or maybe even more important than video. So you want to make sure you have that right. We're also moving forward with installing additional TVs or I should say TVs or projectors in Fisher classrooms, so that in co-teaching, as Dan said earlier, when it's displayed up on the screen, it's easy for students to see and understand. These will also come with audio projections, such as speakers or built into TVs. And lastly, professional development. We archived all of the professional development offerings that we had this past spring, and those are on the Technology Services website and are available for teachers to look at this time and going forward. We're also in the process of scheduling some additional PD opportunities for teachers, and those as well will be archived and put on the Tech Services website. That's back to you, Misty.
Thanks. All right, Arcia.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the protocols we're going to have in place for when we do open our schools. There's a distinction here between cleaning and sanitizing, and I'm going to reiterate that. And so just be listening for that difference. But we have shifted, or we anticipate shifting the custodian schedules to have more custodians on hand or more hours overlap during the day when students are present, to be able to respond quicker to anything that's needed along cleaning and sanitizing. So student restrooms will be cleaned 2 to 3 times a day. All classrooms will be cleaned daily. You can look at the details there of what that means. We will restock all supplies once a day. That's hand sanitizer, soap, paper towels. Offices and other occupied areas will be cleaned once a day. Outside tables, handrails, all high touch areas inside and outside will be cleaned at least once a day. Trash will be taken out twice a day, and after lunch as appropriate if we get to the point where we're going to be eating on campus or snack. Each classroom will be given a vinegar, soap, and water solution for them to use within the class. This is both safe, and vinegar does have some virucidal properties to it that will allow for a little more peace of mind with controlling the virus. More than peace of mind, it does have virucidal properties. In addition to that, every single space on our campuses will be sanitized each day. And we're going to ask staff to stay away, to not come before 7 a.m. and to clear campus by 4 p.m. to allow the custodial staff to sanitize each space. And
Are they going to be using misters, Arcia?
Yes, they're going to be using the Santa spray or Santi spray. It's almost like a paint sprayer, but it mists a sanitizing solution.
Like we saw on the subways in New York when they were on TV, that kind of thing.
Yep.
Only Tim would know that. Tim is an actual New Yorker here. So yes.
Yes, Arcia, we took delivery of 15 of them, John. And we have the EPA rated chemicals that we just took delivery of also to start the process.
So they're going to go down, they can quickly sanitize all of our spaces and get them to be absolutely pristine before any kids come into them. Thomas, you want to add anything else?
So the chemical we'll be using is on the CDC website. It's on the CDC list. It's an EPA approved. It's got an EPA approved number. It's got a 5 to 10 minute dwell time. So like Arcia touched on, there's a difference between cleaning and sanitizing. So when we go in and clean a room, basically that's wiping down high touch surfaces. And then the last thing that the custodial staff would do would be go in and use the sanitizers. And then the room is 5 to 10 minutes later, the room is completely sanitized and ready to be used again.
I want to also just mention one more thing. Across the board, the LGUSD staff has made, heroic efforts during this time. The custodial staff and the maintenance crew have been working so hard, tirelessly, to get us ready for that when that day comes, when we get to open our campuses again. So big shout out to the custodial staff and the maintenance department. And
Yeah.
Thomas, who came in, talk about trial by fire, who came in and inherited COVID-19.
Yeah, hit the ground running is a little bit of an understatement.
Yeah, totally.
So additional information or points that we have in process right now is we are working to collect, gather, and procure, provide, have ready a classroom staff safety provisions and PPE and plexi shields. Tomorrow, our maintenance team is picking up the state provisions of PPE for the first 60 days of in-person instruction. So we will have that in addition to the items that the district is purchasing. We are providing each classroom teacher, each classroom space with a plexi shield so that while the guidelines say to socially distance and stay 6 feet away, we have heard from teachers that they would still value the importance of conferencing and having individual and personal conversations, and by providing a shield that's movable in their classroom would offer them the opportunity to still have closer distance conversations with students safely. We are looking at procuring and having everything in place for our gate safety stations in terms of PPE provision. The staff will not be standing right next to a student. It will be a distance non-contact process. And staff will be provided masks and shields and gowns and the things that would be necessary, gloves for that experience. We have done a lot of detail work. I mentioned a few minutes ago, the dryers in the bathrooms have been turned off. We have installed, I won't say we, I will say the maintenance and operations department has installed paper towel dispensers. They are making changes right now to water fountains, changing out a number of water fountains on each campus to bottle fillers. So students will have that access. We will ask families to provide for their child a reusable water bottle rather than using shared water fountains. We're providing hand washing stations at each campus in addition to sinks in the classroom. We are obtaining hand washing stations. We have some already in the maintenance yard, and we're gathering more of those for each site. We're looking at and defining, making sure we have all of our outdoor learning spaces and field use, as I mentioned. The HVAC commissioning is happening currently. They've been here the last 2 weeks. They're back again tomorrow. We have a toolkit I mentioned earlier in development. We have a pretty extensive communication document. It's about 13 pages long with narrative of a lot of these pieces of information that we've talked about tonight that will be available to share with families and on the district website, which is number 8. The website will be updated with information about reopening plans or restarting plans. And we will continue to meet with our subgroups. This is just an example. There are many more. The list seems to expand each day, like, oh, we got to meet with that group. We need to meet with, we need input from this set of people. So our kindergarten teachers have had one meeting. There'll be a follow-up. Our specials have had a meeting. There will be a follow-up. We need to meet with administrative assistants and gate teams when those are identified. We've had 2 elective meetings. There will be a follow-up, a meeting with all of the middle school departments to look at how the plans are different for each of their content areas. We'll continue to have student services plans and how our IEPs and services will be implemented in our models and program pieces. And then RC is also going to be following up with our English learner team around how we're going to support those students. And there are many more. That's just the list, the examples. And then I think in closing, at the risk of actually reading this to you, even though I feel like I just read the last screen, but at the risk of reading it to you, I think that these are really important when we've been meeting and talking about things that we know. This is because there's a lot we don't know. To Paul's point at the beginning, uncertainty is our certainty right now. This is a global pandemic. We recognize that it has significant effects, and it is definitely impacting school and what we feel like is normal. We know that none of the programs we've talked about so far tonight, any of our plans or phases, can truly replace what the Los Gatos Full Day Comprehensive Program provides. We know that there was learning disruption. We know we've had social disruption, and we know that routines were certainly turned upside down, and we're trying to reestablish those. We absolutely know that health and safety need to be paramount to any public school. And I think one of our strengths here is that our normal programs and values have demonstrated that health and safety is important to us. We know that our teachers are actively involved with the methodology, our curriculum and instruction components, technology, and developmental, social, emotional, professional development aspects. They have been since for always, but definitely in the spring, and they continue to be so even over the summer months, and participating in conversations on what would normally be their vacation. We know that our teaching and support staff are fully committed and strong. We don't want to present any of our plans that that is not happening, that the teachers are not committed to getting back on campus. They have reiterated that multiple times. And we also know, and I think most importantly, is that we can support our students moving forward this year and beyond. We recognize it won't just be a one-year impact. There will be course impacts, there will be minute impacts, there will be things that we'll have to continue to address as we move forward, but we know that the district can do it. And we feel confident, and we feel we're impressed with the staff. We feel like they have totally stepped up, and together over the last several months, we've shown that we can respond and adapt. And so we think that that component moving forward puts us in a really strong place, beginning remotely and moving into phases as it's appropriate. And I think that's it.
Thank you, Misty and Arcia. If the board has, and what I'll say is we have a lot of public comment, but if their board has purely clarifying questions, first without sort of discussion, but just clarifying, why don't we go through that? I think Peter would be first for clarifying questions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any. Dan and I have been involved as the board liaisons to this effort since back in early May, I think, when it started. So I've seen it develop and evolve and re-evolve. And so, yeah, I don't have any questions at this time. Thanks.
Stephen?
I don't have anything to ask. It's very well presented. Thank you.
John?
Yeah, well, I think you all have done a wonderful job. A couple of clarifying questions. One on masks. Are we going to have masks available for kids if they don't have them, or if they bring in a mask that's just really gross?
Yes, thank you. That's a good clarifying question. We will have masks for staff. We'll have backup masks. We're actually looking at each classroom would have a supply. In our training video, we talked about sneezing or coughing. Kids need to keep the mask on and still cough or sneeze into their elbow. So there would be masks for that.
Good. So there'll be some hygiene
yeah.
that'll be starting this whole thing out of what to do and what not to do and so forth. That's great. I've seen some really gross masks on people. Anyway, communication for parents. If they have a question, is the admin at their school still available to call? My daughter would call Jill. Hey, Jill, is there something going on? I need to know, whatever. Is that type of real-time communication, ask and answer, going to still be available?
When the school year begins, do you mean? Or
August
like
13th.
Yes.
Because I think there's going to be a lot of questions when this whole thing starts out. I think there's a lot of concerns. We've all seen the emails, and there's certainly a magnitude of that haven't sent any emails in. They're going to have questions and concerns, and I think it's important that we answer them in a timely manner.
Hey, John, the school offices will open the first week of August.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Courtney, any clarifying questions?
Yeah, so for the, not for the remote phase, but for the phase 1 and onward, will we set rules around keeping windows open? I imagine that there's the HVAC work, which makes sense to me, but it seems like for the air ventilation, that might be important. Just curious.
Yeah, I'm going to try not to bungle it. So Thomas, please feel free to correct my words. Yes, we will encourage people to have their doors and windows open. We do have some new buildings that have been built that due to building codes do not have operable windows, which is a significant reason to have the HVAC commissioning done and done well. In terms of the settings, oftentimes, and we've had some staff questions around this, if you open the door, the HVAC system shuts off in the economy setting, which we have talked about in terms of in the past, green aspects of things and saving money and having those turned off. Those settings are being turned off so that the system will run even when windows and doors are open.
Yeah, it's called economizer mode. And so, yeah, that can all be disabled, and it will be disabled.
Okay.
Courtney, to answer your question further there, in the classrooms that do not have operable windows, that's where the commissioning company is really focusing their attention, making sure that proper airflow for the size of the room and the amount of people that can be in it is really their concern. So that's where we're spending the majority of our time.
Okay, cool. And then as far as the scenarios go in terms of exposure, I don't need to hear all the answers, but am I correct in assuming that you've got a plan for, hey, there's a kid in a class and he doesn't test positive, but his mom tests positive. So then he goes home and all the kids in his cohort go home, or like, I'm just trying to play out all of those scenarios and just want to make sure that that's all on the list of stuff that you guys have thought about.
So we're receiving specific guidelines from the county on that, and what to do if there is an exposure in relation to the stable cohorts.
Okay.
They're putting that together, and that will be communicated to all of the staff and families.
Okay. And then I have fielded a lot of questions from folks about testing and whether we can encourage people to get tested just routinely, or it's not in the plans. I know it's not required by the county, but is that something that we've considered and chosen not to do, and why?
So we are going to encourage our staff to take advantage of free testing, and the County Office of Education has this set up and has offered dates, and we'll continue to encourage that.
If I could piggyback on that question that Courtney raised, if there is exposure, have we made arrangements to do testing to all of the students in the area, the cohorts that may have had that possible exposure?
So generally speaking, when within a cohort, if there is exposure, that cohort itself individually goes on quarantine, but not necessarily the testing. And it depends on firsthand exposure versus secondary exposure.
Yeah, the parent has it, and the kid goes to school. Yeah. Okay.
And that's part of the county guidance. That's been put out preliminarily. Sort of says which distance or role of who is exposed, what periods they have to stay home, or if they get tested, when they can come back after that, et cetera. And they're going to give the detail. I had one question just on if Courtney and John's done. So when we start in the remote phase, do we have a plan yet for delivery or pickup of packets so kids have materials, whether it's for art or just other things that will be helpful beyond the Chromebook, so that, especially the younger kids, they need more tactile, all the activities won't be web-based.
So I'm going to answer that in what I feel like is one of my new most frequently answered ways. Yes and no. We have a plan that will be an element of what we do, but the full details of what that plan is are not worked out yet. We need to work with each staff around each school site around what the pickup model would look like. We need to talk about like just initial distribution, right? Even textbooks at Fisher, things like that. We'll have a different kind of distribution in elementary school than we normally do. So that is between last week's conversations and today, that is a hot top item on our list, and we're starting to pull the people together to flesh out the details.
I figured you were. All right. I think that's it for clarifying questions. So we'll go to public comment. Oh, John, you had one more?
I have one or two more.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Courtney. I'll follow you.
I'm just wondering, do our meals kick off again then starting August 13th? Yeah, okay. And
Courtney, I should say, I actually meant to say it because Arcia, gave a shout out to our custodial staff. Our food pass staff is still serving meals right now. We're actively still serving meals in the drive-through at Fisher, and it will continue, moving forward. Therese works with the state and all the provisions around that pretty much weekly right now around meal nutrition services.
Would it stay at Fisher? So like Lex families would drive to Fisher, or would we distribute to the school sites, do you think?
Therese?
So it depends. The program hasn't updated for if we're doing remotely in the fall. It'll go back to the old kind of structure from the feds. And so we will most likely during remote have it be from one site, because we have to do some sort of car delivery kind of system. But once we have students on site, we will do a distribution system at each site.
Okay. And for the support of our special ed students during remote learning in particular, I know that was a challenge, I think, in the spring. Is the general plan to use that dedicated like small group time or one-on-one time, those time slots to fill in some of those gaps, or like what's the general approach that we're taking?
I think the general approach is that our special ed program will be run during the day concurrently with the instructional piece for some of those targeted times, yes. It will also be necessary, given the nature of remote, that they'll have to do some of those times beyond those 4 hours in the morning.
Okay, so kind of be almost like pull out during
yeah.
the 9 to 11:30. Okay.
Generally. There will be a lot of nuances to that, but yes, generally.
Okay, thanks. I think I'm done now, Dan.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so I have a question for Tim. Is there any limits that home Wi-Fi would be stretched if they had, for example, my daughter's house? She's got 3 kids and her own business all on their home Wi-Fi. Is that going to be stretched to have everybody on it at one time?
Well, I can't speak for every household. Certainly some households will have better connectivity than others. And what we do also offer are T-Mobile hotspots. So if there is a cellular signal in the vicinity of that student's home, we can loan them a T-Mobile hotspot that it's not super fast, but it does provide enough connectivity that their Chromebook should be able to be on Zoom, for example, without any issue.
Well, that's great. I'm just looking for if we have that capability. I think she is just fine. The second one to Thomas, looking at this thing explodes on the news every day. They would be very happy to do 5 hours a day on it. But one thing that I noticed was Taiwan, that has a very low exposure rate. I think they have 5. Okay, when their kids go back into school, they walk through, they have their hands, they have a wipe that they put on their hands, and they walk through a sanitizing mat. And then their schools have all the HVAC disinfectant, for lack of a better term. Have we ever looked at sanitizing mats?
I have not looked into those. No, actually, this is the first time I've ever heard of them.
I just saw it on TV, and I thought it was interesting that they're trying to cover all bases: hands, feet, and air. Going into the classroom. So
yeah, it's definitely something to look into. Thank you.
And the other thing is more of a comment than really a question. Before this thing started, Misty told me how to get into the county and look at what the incident rates are in Los Gatos. And I think we're at 55 for Los Gatos and surrounding zip codes. I understand we need to follow the county guidance, but I still think that many parents are going to bring up the fact that Los Gatos does not have the same exposure opportunities that some of the more densely populated areas are. So we ought to keep that in mind as well. End of comment. Thank you.
All right. And just on the meal distribution, to clarify, again, as Peter and I, we've been in all these meetings, so we've heard the details. But during, if kids they're not going to the cafeteria, so the meals actually would be distributed to each classroom, so they wouldn't be cross mixing. So, to the extent they ordered and would have to order in advance, they would get the meal delivered to them. So I think if that's it for clarifying questions, we can go to the public comment, and then we will have a discussion afterwards. So Michelle, if you want to start reading.
Thank you. Bear with me a moment here while I refresh and pull it up. Okay, here we go. Adrian Cox wrote, reopening for in-person instruction at this point of the pandemic would be sending our teachers and children to the front lines as test subjects. Kids have been by far the most protected since March, so the data as it relates to this virus in children is sorely lacking. And to use the current data as a relevant way to make a decision of this magnitude is dangerous at best and catastrophic at worst. I sincerely hope that our district leaders can stand up to the misguided pressure of those who are ignoring science and the current infection death rates for their own personal reasons and consider the community at large. The children will not have the socialization benefits they once enjoyed despite being in the classroom with their peers. It is delusional to fall back on this excuse for improved mental health. Until testing and isolating are significantly improved, reopening schools for in-person instruction shouldn't even be discussed. Sue Sweet wrote, I hope that children may return to school full-time this fall, along with the 900 other parents that signed the below petition requesting the same. In the very sad case that the board does approve 100% virtual, which I have heard has already been decided, and which I feel would be further setting aside our children's education unnecessarily, I would ask the board to ensure much higher standards in teaching in terms of amount of instruction given than we saw in spring. I would ask that the board require a minimum number of hours of Zoom per week where actual instruction is provided, not inclusive of pet show and tell sessions or similar. Having 2 kids at Van Meter, the amount of schoolwork that each child was assigned varied widely. My younger child learned quite a bit and had several hours of schoolwork daily. However, my older child got only 30 to 45 total minutes of work a day. I would audit to make sure he did it all, but very little was assigned. I would ask the LGUSD board to mandate a minimum amount of virtual instruction that must be provided, or else we will continue to see this huge variation and lack of meaningful education provided in some classes. I would also ask that if 100% virtual is approved, that the board announce now under what specific conditions we will go back to school in person. For example, when the infection rate is less than X, etc. If the answer is something like we can't predict, or whenever a vaccine is found, then parents deserve to know. In this case, we can consider pulling students from the district now and seeking alternative options. Given our experience with LGUSD virtual instruction this past spring, and our need as parents to ensure that our students get a quality education, and a link is provided that I will forward to the board. Linda wrote, how will distance learning be different in 2021 than in the spring for elementary age students? Patrick Freeberger, I have seen no discussion on mitigating risk by teaching under a sunshade on the school blacktop. Students could have their own Chromebooks, wear masks, and otherwise minimize contact. The temperature checks can be done on entering the school, etc. Also, we do not need a one-size-fits-all solution. This may not work for first and second graders, but should work for the rest. We are blessed with a mild climate, and we should begin taking advantage of that. Even if we canceled school on days with forecasted heavy rain, we would still be significantly ahead. Waiting for 100% safe in classroom environment before teachers are willing to return to school could be a year or more away. We need some alternative ideas to the all or nothing school as normal or remote learning thinking. This is one suggestion that I know you can improve on to get our kids safely learning again. Thank you. Now we do have a 3-minute time limit, and for some of these, I think we're going to have to implement that. So I'll start the timer now. Pamela Bond, I appreciate that you do and have all that you do and have done for LGUSD. I wanted to put forth my input regarding either current or future plans to reopen to part-time or full-time in-person learning. I think that the only safe decision is to keep school closed this fall and until it is clearly safe beyond doubt to congregate indoors. With up to a 5-day incubation period, asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic staff, children, and parents picking up their kids could pass the virus easily. We see a lot of grandparents picking up their grandchildren, and there are grandparents living with their families. Regulating interaction in the parking lots and off campus after school is impossible. So even if we follow the rules at school, this all breaks down off campus. Class cohorts will not only be playing with their group after school or on weekends. Daycare or clubhouse would mix these kids up as well. As soon as the cold and flu season hits, I would expect some major breakdowns, as any kid with symptoms would be staying home, or parents will send their children to school thinking it's a cold when it's really COVID-19. They may pass under the radar for screening, or parents will send their children back to school too early. Children are by and large not getting tested. We don't have an accurate read on child infection rates. As the virus progresses in certain states, thousands of children are getting sick from a virus that was previously thought to not affect children as much. Some of these children have lasting health effects, so even if it's not killing them, we don't know the extent of long-term damage yet, even in adults. There is exponential growth in pediatric cases in Florida. Half of the cases are children ages 5 to 15. Cases are increasing in California and in Santa Clara County. Now that the county is allowing outdoor gatherings of up to 60 people and gyms and other indoor businesses are opening, we don't know the effects of these new activities on the case rate for several weeks. I know families who have chosen to travel during the summer break and they have not engaged in safe behavior. No social distancing or mask wearing with family or friends from out of town, for example. I can tell from the outdoor dining scene in town, groups in downtown, etc., that people have not been taking this seriously. Cases in Los Gatos were stagnant until mid-June when they started rising. It seems like public opinion may be shifting, but there are still many who don't find it necessary to wear a mask, or they wear an inadequate mask because the CDC and government were so late in describing the best masks to use. A bandana is not good enough, particularly indoors. What will the children be asked to wear at school? Mask research has some information, which I have collected and would be happy to share. But I know that most parents are buying or making masks that are probably not going to be that effective in an indoor setting. They may wear the same mask every day or more than one day when it should be sterilized each day. I also don't think it's realistic to expect that the younger kids will wear or handle masks properly, which will dramatically increase risk to other students, teachers, and other staff at school. I know friends in Massachusetts, we have reached the 3-minute mark, and that will be taken into the record. Okay. Carrie Valouche. As a teacher in this district, one word describes my reputation and professional record: adaptability. In my 8 years in the community, I have taught 4 different grade levels at 2 schools, several of which were in combo classes. Each year in this district has required me to pivot from my original plans and work outside of my comfort zone. The 2020-21 school year will prove to be my most significant adaptation yet. As someone who is no stranger to working in unknown and novel conditions, I understand that there are no situations in which all the variables are known. Despite this, we must endeavor to arm ourselves with facts, figures, and meticulous planning. The plan we arm ourselves with this school year must address our parent community's needs and challenge our pupils academically. Most importantly, any plan we move forward with must ensure that we aren't needlessly exposing our children and increasingly vulnerable teacher population to conditions that may put their health at risk. With the deadline for decisive action drawing disturbingly near, one point has become unmistakably apparent. Our leadership has been redirecting time and resources from identified productive educational methodologies to unknowable and reactionary attempts to appease the loudest parents of the community. Instead of discussing how to buy canopies to cover outdoor learning activities, we should invest in learning management systems and training that will modernize our classrooms through the COVID-19 pandemic beyond. I will not feel comfortable returning to school until I believe it is done under the supervision of visionary leadership with the prudence to carry us through our current situation and empower us to succeed for the years to come. Distance learning and hybrid learning paradigms have been looming over our district for years. The COVID-19 pandemic comes with an opportunity to catapult our learning outcomes into the world of tomorrow through forced distance learning scenarios, and we respond with canopies. As you hear this presentation, look for data, research, and projected outcomes before you decide our fates. I trust you will be left wanting. We have precious few days left before we regain charge of our students. We must focus on delivering high quality learning outcomes or accept our fate as overqualified babysitters under a canopy. Jared and Lacey Milos. Dear LGUSD board, employees, and all other parties, we are writing in response to the reopening of the schools in Los Gatos, and in doing so, we are wearing many hats. Those of a second grade teacher, a husband of that teacher, parents of an incoming fifth grader at Blossom Hill, directors of Blossom Hill Chorus, and a type 1 diabetic who's at a higher risk in regards to COVID-19. We want to begin by acknowledging the hard work of the whole district, starting with the closures of the schools in March and continuing through the summer. We know this is a difficult time for everyone, and the anxiety and stress centered around the return to school is compounded by the current situations in our county. We recognize that we are in unprecedented times and our schools are facing many unknowns. That being said, we are very concerned with the current plan to return to school, as it appears to be based on an arbitrary timeline instead of creating transparent guidelines based on science and a decreased number of COVID-19 cases in Santa Clara County. While many people may want to return to the classroom, the opinions and needs of the community should not supersede the health and safety of our students and teachers. We ask that the district consider allowing for an extended period of remote learning at the beginning of the year, and that transitioning to different scenarios occur only when it is safe to do so. Please also keep in mind that as each transition approaches, staff will need to be given time to prepare. We are aware of the many concerns of our teachers, of other teachers and parents in the district, and we echo most of those concerns. After reading and rereading the Santa Clara County guidelines for reopening schools, we have many questions, but that's a conversation for another time, one that should involve many teachers across all grade levels and from all walks of life. Our country puts an unprecedented amount of expectations on our teachers and educational staff. While we all want to return to the classroom, asking teachers and their families to put their lives on the line is an unnecessary risk. Our hope is that the LGUSD community works together to be sure that all of us are safe. Thank you for your time. The Milos family. Melissa Schilling, good afternoon. Thank you for your careful consideration of the community and the decision to close schools. This is a smart, sound decision. My question is regarding special education. The remote learning plan included many Zoom meetings that were unmanageable for students to plan, participate, and fully engage with on their own. With no official instruction from the U.S. Department of Education, special education teachers find themselves struggling to provide adequate instruction with a transition to remote instruction. I'd like to see the district offer a stronger platform on which to base instruction. The Google Suite on its own for students with developmental and learning disabilities is inadequate or inequitable. How does the board plan to address this for the fall trimester? Teachers have also expressed concerns about the lack of instruction they've received. There are currently no specific guidelines in place for special education teachers to follow this period of remote instruction. How does the district plan to train SPED staff specifically? What supports are planned in regards to hands-on activities, physical learning opportunities, and unifying support providers' schedules? In lieu of a strong plan for SPED, does the district plan to offer an alternative homeschool curriculum with seasoned, trained, contracted staff from another organization more adept at running remote learning programs? Thank you so kindly for your time, and I look forward to better understanding the plan for our exceptional learners, SPED. Stacy Petty. Members of the school board, thank you for hearing comments on the plan for reopening schools. It concerned me deeply that just days ago, the plan was to return to school with full classes, no social distancing in the classroom, and no student mandated to wear masks in the classroom. I have been sheltered in place with my family since March, being careful when we grocery shop, exercise outdoors, pick up food at a restaurant, or do anything out of our house that was near other people. I thought it was my social responsibility to help flatten the curve and stay safe so that hospitals and first responders could help those who were in dire need of help. Now the plan seems to be remote teaching to start, half classes likely just after Labor Day, and full classes likely just after Halloween. I don't understand how we're proposing dates. Shouldn't we see something more along the lines of schools will open with half classes, socially distanced, and masks required once there have been 2 weeks in a row of a downward trend in COVID cases, or maybe 2 weeks in a row of no new cases? Shouldn't we base reopening on a measurable scientific fact that would show a big decrease in COVID cases? I love teaching. I want to see students in person. However, I don't think we should return to school until it is safe. Also, LGUSD needs to have a plan to help families with medically fragile members. This could be the student, a parent, or family member living in the household. For those families, it will not be an option for them to have the child return to school. It would go against doctor's orders for the child to return to school and endanger the life of someone in the home. Instead, allow teachers who are medically fragile or at high risk of infection to be fully remote teachers who can create the online lessons for a particular grade level, much like CIA members created the grade-specific lessons. This would allow a medically fragile teacher to be fully paid and not lose credit towards retirement. So please remove proposed dates from the return to school scenario and replace them with measurable scientific data. Thank you for your time. Okay, Sarah Krings. Children need some form of in-person instruction this school year. I feel for all of the stakeholders impacted by this decision, children, parents, and teachers. What frustrates me is the lack of ingenuity and innovation applied to the situation we find ourselves in. Where is the outdoor school? Where is the summer camp approach, small pause while hiring college interns to support? Have you leaned on the home and school clubs for potential funding to support innovation? I understand these solutions can't be done to scale for all students immediately, but in this community especially, where some of the brightest minds and problem solvers have chosen to live, I expect our schools to reflect that thinking. There needs to be some experimentation with in-person instruction beginning August 13th. I believe there will be teachers willing to help co-design a safe environment. Thank you. Veronica Newman. Some of these, I think we're getting close to needing to time again. Veronica Newman, I am like everyone else in our school community that I long for the day when we can be back in the classroom, but that is just not possible when lives are at stake. I have been teaching for 28 years and have dedicated my life to education. I am also a mother. I have my students and my own children in mind at all times when making decisions in life. I always want to do the right thing. I have my students and my own children in mind at all, teaching remotely is the right thing. I am grateful that our district has made the wise decision to teach our children remotely. It is vitally important that the district prioritize the safety of our children, teachers, and staff, because we are in the middle of a pandemic. It is literally the difference between life and death. However, I firmly believe that we should be prepared to continue remote learning for longer than has been proposed. In fact, there shouldn't be dates attached. If we focus and accept that pandemic is our reality, then we can begin to focus on a robust and remote learning program. That would be what is in the absolute best interest of the children. We are not ready to return to the classroom, not even on a hybrid situation, and most definitely not a full class. The risk of infection in a school environment is a serious one. Fortunately, there is a solution in remote learning. Is remote learning difficult? Yes. Is remote learning the best? No, but we can make it better. We are in a time in which there are tools and programs that can help deliver instruction remotely. Remote learning is the only way that we can keep potential infections at bay and families safe. We all worry about the social emotional toll that remote learning takes on children. It is a huge concern. However, I do not think that returning to school will be less stressful and sad. It will be scary to return in the way we would have to in the middle of a pandemic. If we are back in the classroom and infections begin to happen, that will be traumatizing for children and teachers. If people begin to get sick, how will we respond? Do we really want to take that risk when there's a solution in remote learning? We should not be willing to risk lives in order to be at school in person. Returning to school in person would force families to make a difficult decision in whether they will take the experiment of sending their young children into harm's way. Families look to school leaders and teachers for sound and safe instruction. I think that we need to be brave. and make difficult yet sound decisions based on science to continue remotely without dates attached. Robin Chen, our family does not support 100% online learning. What is the end of the game if we go this route? No school until a vaccine? What if no vaccine is available? Please read these Canadian guidelines. There's a link I'll share with the board. Of note in this quote, we have to accept that COVID-19 will stay with us for a long time. We must move on with certain activities in our lives, such as schooling, while keeping in mind that there are a lot of ways to mitigate risk, says Dr. Ronald Cohn, President and CEO of Sick Kids and one of the authors of the document. Not opening schools in September would continue to have a negative impact on the mental, behavioral, and developmental health of children. Or this quote from Dr. Robert R. Redfield, Director of the CDC. As a public health leader and grandfather, I believe that having schools closed due to COVID-19 is a greater public health threat to children than having the schools reopen. I am confident we can open schools safely in partnership with local jurisdictions. I'm speaking from a place of privilege. Our income was not cut off. I can stay home with my children to help them. What of those not in my position? Even with me being home, my oldest struggled with her mental health. My youngest gave up. She disappeared in her online classes. These kids need to be in school for their social, mental, and developmental well-being. Studies prove they are not transmitting this virus in the same way they do others. Teachers have a bigger risk from their community in general, for example, grocery store or contact with each other. Thank you for your consideration. Bear with me for a moment while I take a sip of water.
Just curious, Michelle, how many public comments are there?
More than 30. I've gone
What are
through.
we- Dozen or so?
Yeah, I'm almost halfway done, I think.
Okay.
Well, unless more have been added on. I think a couple more we might need to implement the timer. Wendy Ottinger, members of the school board, I want to start by thanking the school board and the administration for the additional hours you have spent to keep our district going during this unprecedented time. After reading the proposed plan for the school year, I was relieved to see that we will be starting the year remotely. Given what we know about how COVID spreads, the thought of being in a room without access to fresh air with 28 students who might be wearing masks for 4 to 5 hours a day doesn't seem safe. What does concern me about the current plan, however, is the lack of scientific data to drive the return to school. The dates of September 8th and late October seem to be arbitrarily chosen. While I appreciate that everyone wants to get back into the classroom as soon as possible, these decisions need to be based on data from our county to ensure a safer return for both students and staff. Additionally, I am concerned about what the plan will be for children and staff who are unable to return to the classroom for medical reasons, either due to their own health issues or someone in their household. This is not a time to leave anyone behind, and we need to work hard as a district to ensure that teachers, staff keep their salary and medical benefits, and students unable to return receive the quality education that they deserve. While I am anxious for this day to return to the classroom to be with my students, there is much work and planning that will need to be done to get all of the details in place. I encourage the district to expand the task force working on these decisions to include more teachers so that we have a broad representation of grade levels and sites, as well as a balance of perspectives. As has been clear in the news, social media, and even amongst friends of mine, people's level of concern about COVID varies greatly. While I can understand that certain people and families are willing to play the odds, not everyone feels comfortable doing that. Distance learning is certainly not ideal for students, teachers, or parents. However, we find ourselves in the midst of a pandemic. There's nothing normal or ideal about this time. We should not return to the classroom until it is safe for everyone to return, and the decision to return should be based on scientific data. Thank you for your time. Wendy Ottinger. Okay. Ala Golub. We have children in 7th grade in Fisher and 1st grade in Blossom Hill. Both I and my husband work full time. Based on our experience with the district's remote learning in March through June, online learning for 5 to 7-year-old children is impossible. Homeschooling by parents who then have to work night hours is possible, but not online schooling by LGUSD. The district should open elementary schools on August 13th, 2020 for in-person instructions. How to open? We have a good weather in California. Use outdoors. 2, students and teachers wear masks. Yes, 5-year-old and older can wear masks and are okay on masks. My 6-year-old went to camp this summer where she was wearing mask all the time. In case of outbreak, You can always close schools quickly and replace with online option. Okay. Tom Wendt, we understand that from previous conversations that teachers and their unions are refusing to go back to school, and therefore the district is considering continued online learning instead of in-person lessons. While understanding the concerns of some teachers who might be at increased risk given pre-existing conditions, it is hard to understand that teachers collectively refuse to go back to school, especially when other occupations do so. For example, ER personnel, doctors, nurses, grocery store workers, bus drivers, etc. We request the district to follow proven processes which have been implemented by many businesses during their reopening process. 1, conduct a survey to exactly understand how many kids would come back to school, assuming that school would open 5 days a week. This allows you to understand better for what you are solving. For example, if there are only 50% of kids returning, existing classrooms might provide enough room to space out, etc. 2, based on the survey results, start implementing concepts to allow for social distancing, podding, etc. There's many businesses out there which would volunteer to share their reopening plan. 3, start thinking out of the box. For example, implement outdoor learning. We are living in one of the few states where you can pitch a tent and do outdoor learning as much as possible. Parents, community is more than happy to organize fundraisers to pay additional equipment of tents. 4, implement a hybrid schedule where teachers are live in the classroom with those students who are allowed to return, while at the same time streaming lessons live for those students whose parents prefer they study from home. In any case, live, online, or hybrid, we as parents request the immediate return to a full-time 8 to 2:30 p.m. school day, following a regular schedule with all subjects being taught, including PE, art, etc., and making sure that kids are schooled full-time as if they were at school. There is a broad-ranging agreement among parents that online learning, as has been practiced last school year, is not sustainable. 30 minutes office hours per day simply does not work and is not a reasonable solution with more and more parents going back to work full-time. The responsibility to teach your kids needs to be back with teachers again on a full-time basis and cannot stay with parents. Thanks very much for your consideration. Tom Wendt. Mary Hellman. Good evening. I am writing to you as an elementary school teacher in LG-USD, but also as a mother, wife, daughter, sister, friend, and resident of Los Gatos. I am in support of opening the school year with distance learning and returning to the school buildings together in a phased approach when it is safe to do so based on declining cases and no deaths for 14 days. My thanks go to our leadership for making the decision to start the school year with distance learning. There are no 100% superb scenarios here, but this is the safest choice, and for that I am thankful. My family is thankful. And by keeping transmission from spreading through schools and therefore more of our area, my community is thankful. Where we are headed together is again uncharted territory, and I'd like to suggest we keep our attention on a few core ideas to guide necessary discussions on the details. First, I would like us to be mindful with our words and deeds around the school year. Language matters. For distance learning, we are not reopening. We are starting the school year. Schools never closed. The buildings did. The people didn't. Most of our staff, including administration, worked harder and longer than we have ever worked in our careers. That is saying a lot because we know educational staff are some of the hardest working and dedicated people around. As another example, what we as teachers and parents engaged in the spring was not distance learning per se. It was emergency trauma teaching. So moving forward, the distance learning we participated in will be a different animal altogether if we are given the time and resources to accomplish it. Second, what we do this year is almost as important as how we approach the school year. How we view this upcoming challenge will be the foundation upon which everything is built. Starting now to focus our immeasurable energies on our abilities to rock distance learning and convey that positivity to our families is key. Some families need intensive support of various types, and I would hope we can rise to meet them. I would like to see us meet families with compassion and caring, truly understanding that we are educational partners. Linked to this positive approach, families need to be coached into creating a positive atmosphere about school now. As Meg Thompson, behaviorist, has said, schools will announce fall plans soon. I imagine everyone will be unhappy. Remember, you help determine your child's attitude. Be angry or sad in private. Discuss your frustrations away from the kids. Set them up for success by teaching them to make the most of it. Be a sounding board for their worries and disappointments. Stay positive and model perseverance. Families need to be reminded right now that if we want to safely return to school buildings, and teachers really do, that we need to be truly practicing social distancing, wearing masks, and good hygiene now. To close, I know everyone loves poetry, so I'd like to end my comments with a poem by Leslie Dwight. What if 2020 isn't canceled? What if 2020 is the year we've been waiting for? A year so uncomfortable, so painful, so scary, so raw that it finally forces us to grow. A year that screams so loud, finally awakening us from our ignorant slumber. A year we finally accept the need for change, declare change, work for change, become the change. And we've reached 3 minutes, and the remainder will be entered into the record. Monica Wong. Nothing can replace physical school with the live teaching and peer interactions. However, if physical classrooms in the pre-pandemic way are unsafe, we ask the district to consider other options, such as staggered class times or outdoor classrooms with tents and suitable furnishing equipment. If we must resort to virtual learning, there needs to be a more robust distance learning model, one that includes more real-time teaching, structured online classes, and a daily schedule that mimics an actual school day. Parents must be included as part of the process, as they are the ones providing the space, technology, materials, and more often than not, disciplining. And I'm going to take another sip of water. Sorry. Okay. Layla Baranian. Dear Board of Trustees, LGUSD. First of all, thank you for your diligence in planning policies in the exceptional year of 2021. We rely on your expertise and judgment, and in the end, we'll follow your directives. Our daughter is an upcoming second grader in Blossom Hill. For our student, the concern is safety, and at the same time, quality education and socialization. During the shelter-in-place period, the material shared by district school class was highly informative and comprehensive, and much appreciated. At the same time, for us a bit overwhelming to weed through the plan and provide to our daughter, then teach and follow up. The other issue was the amount of teaching we had to convey. In addition to daily routines, we now needed to teach school material too. It was too much teaching coming from one source. And of course, there was the requirements for emotional intelligence, development of a young mind, which was hard to attain during shelter in place. In 2020-21, considering all that is going on and the above noted experience, what is important for us is continuous supervision, either remote or in person, for both teaching and socialization. Either online or meeting in class, we feel the need for our daughter to be engaged with her teachers, and at least some classmates for a few hours every day. Appreciate your consideration, and again, thanks for all you do for our district. Daniela, sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce the last name. First of all, we would like to thank you and the district for all the work done to provide a great learning experience for the kids, especially given the unprecedented circumstances. We have been in contact with teachers from the district, and we know the district has been working very hard at designing options and planning ahead. We are very encouraged to see the proposal of starting the school year with remote learning. We would like to comment on one of the statements of the deck. Our staff, administration, and families want to be back on campus. This statement does not reflect the view of our family. Absent a treatment vaccine, our family cannot have kids return to school in person learning. We are a family of 8 living together in the same household, 2 parents, 2 kids, 2nd grade and 5th grade, and 4 grandparents aged 68 plus, 2 of them with cancer/diabetes. We also acknowledge science does not know enough about infection susceptibility and the long-term effects of COVID-19 in kids. Many sources acknowledge research in the area is limited at best. While the kids may not be getting very sick, the possibility of them bringing home the virus and infecting the adults remains. Therefore, our concerns around our 2 kids returning to in-person learning. We would like the district to comment on the availability of an online only with no physical presence required in phase 2 and 3. Without an online learning option, our kids are effectively forced out of the LG public school system, and we must consider keeping the kids out of school for as long as the risks remain. My husband and I both work, so homeschooling is not an option. private school is very expensive, and we are big believers in the public school system. We cannot do in-person learning because we are higher risk. We would like to understand the implications of the proposed plan for families in the LG Schools District with similar concerns to ours. We are in the middle of the most technologically advanced area in the world. Technology can be used as an enabler for families that need remote learning. We see the possibility of designing an online-only option that requires less resources than in person and prevents less risk for teachers that may they themselves be in the higher risk category. The district may consider one class per district for the appropriate levels where there is where there's sufficient demand for 100% online learning. Teachers at high risk of infection could teach this class. Running. You know what, I probably should have set the timer on this one. Sorry about that. We would like to understand the implications of the proposed plan for families in the LG School District. I apologize, I just got lost. This is a long one. Running an online program takes less resources than an in-person program, less cleaning, less maintenance, less in-class room resources, and has less risk for everybody involved. While we appreciate that in-person learning is best, we are in the middle of a global pandemic and there is no treatment vaccine available. The district needs to provide options that cater to the needs of all families involved.
Michelle, that's time.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I didn't set the timer on that one. Okay. Diana Hill, LGETA comment to the Board of Trustees. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. On behalf of the Los Gatos Elementary Teachers Association, we thank you and the district leadership for your acknowledgement of teachers' dedication and professionalism. Labor negotiations at the end of last year amidst a pandemic, with us all sheltering in place, was incredibly challenging, but surprisingly productive. We appreciate the process and outcome of the bargaining sessions. Thank you. This evening, we are looking ahead to how we can continue to work together. Tonight, you will hear a reopening school update, and the district seeks direction from the governing board in implementing the plan. On behalf of the association membership, I want to be clear that teachers were not consulted in the selection of the scenarios previously, nor were we consulted in the current reopening schools plan. The reopening schools task force didn't select the scenarios. As the agenda mentions, teachers involved in the reopening school task force work groups worked from March to the present to further details of the agreed upon plan for each scenario while prioritizing student and staff safety. In fact, conversations focused on the curricular and scheduling issues more than safety. The association appreciates the ongoing opportunities to provide feedback through representation on the task force. In particular, we appreciate the tireless work of Misty Hartung and Arcia DeRosti, working with the middle school and elementary groups respectively. I personally look forward to the weekly conversations with Superintendent Johnson, Ms. Rodriguez, and Ms. Tejas. We have found that working together, we can achieve more than the common good. We understand that the district position is that safety is the highest priority. We expect that the teachers will be involved in safety and logistical questions, as well as the curricular and scheduling conversations. We also recognize that while a small group of teachers have shared ideas, concerns, and solutions to how we can provide the best educational experience possible amidst the global pandemic, all teachers should be involved in providing input. The reopening schools task force meetings began while school was in session, and they have continued throughout the summer. Teacher input is critical, and we expect to be involved in the ongoing conversations. We realize that subgroups of the task force may need to meet before our next work group session at the end of July. We want to be involved in the important work, and we hope that the board realizes that teachers offer a critical perspective that will only assist in the smooth rollout of whatever scenario we find ourselves in next. Just yesterday, the elementary and middle school re-entry task force groups were called together to get a critical update from district administration. While our follow-up conversation was brief, teachers were invited to ask questions and provide feedback comments via a Google form. As I understand, Misty and Arcia then worked to address these items in the presentation this evening. Yesterday, the association held school site-based town hall meetings, and we shared concerns about safety if when staff and students return to campus. We are in conversation with the district leadership about these concerns and are hopeful that we will have more answers before decisions are made to move it. Do you want me to stop?
Public comment, we've set 3-minute limits.
The rest of that will go into the written record. Mike Zhu, schools should be strictly online this fall to protect both the children and teacher staff members, as well as the students' elderly family members. If students were physically returned to school with the current COVID-19 situation, for sure, there will be new infections and many of them and fatalities related to coronavirus. Sam Cates, as a new LGUSD family with an incoming kindergartner, I'd like to hear more detail about the small group meetings mentioned in the slide deck. Will kindergartners be meeting in small groups regularly, sporadically, just as a one-time meet and greet? Lori, I would prefer that kids and educators be safe, so if it's virtual, we are on board. That being said, the current distance learning is not adequate. The kids need motivation as well as accountability. Checklists for work completed is not enough. They need their work checked and graded. In addition, there needs to be consistency across the teachers to do more than 30 minutes of live session teaching and all using the same tools, whether that's Zoom or Google Classroom or whatever. The instructional live teaching is really important and it should mimic a regular school day as opposed to a list of homework after a 30-minute teaching session. The idea of a virtual classroom is one to many, so the perspective of teaching to a classroom of kids is no longer valid, and the classes should be taught with that perspective. Teachers have the ability to teach many students at once instead of a typical classroom of kids. This in turn would leave time for teachers to plan, assess, answer student parent questions, etc. by setting up office hours. Key thoughts: robust virtual learning, live teacher session for a minimum of 45 minutes to an hour per subject, regular school hours for virtual or close to that schedule. Work being reviewed and graded. As a parent, I can keep the home schedule going to assist in attendance or issues with my student. Art, music, and PE need to be ramped up, not adequate, at least to the elementary level. Consistency would be very helpful. Teachers using the same tools, not one on Zoom and the other on Google Classroom, etc. Laura DeSessa. First off, I want to thank the LGUSD administrative team for the countless hours they've been putting into planning for our district during this time. Our district weathered the first part of this storm tremendously well because of their efforts, and of course, the efforts of all of our staff members. Looking at the proposed plan for 2020-2021, I do have a few concerns. First, I believe strongly that we should be using data regarding COVID to drive decisions on if or when to reopen campuses. Putting seemingly arbitrary dates on the calendar to shift to a new phase puts pressure on the district to move forward with those dates, even if it is not safe to do so. Also, each time we transition to a new phase, families, both students and staff, are put through a tremendous and very challenging transition. I would like to suggest that we commit to remote learning for the first trimester and then reevaluate the situation at that time. In the case where we do return to campus, in either scenario, there will be children who cannot join us due to either their own health or a family member's health. The district has a responsibility to provide all of these children with a quality alternate distance learning option, not just the ones whose own health could be impaired. The health and safety of our kids' families is just as important as the health and safety of the kids themselves, and denying that child a quality education because of this situation is unacceptable. Secondly, the proposed schedule for distance learning has electives in the afternoons for 1st through 5th graders. It appears as though kindergartners do not receive any of the electives as they do not have distance learning in the afternoons. I feel it is unfair for these kids to not have these opportunities and am concerned that this could have an impact on LGEF donations. Perhaps the electives, art and music specifically, can be worked into their morning times without adding time in the afternoons. In addition, it seems that each grade level will have their electives all at the same time per site. I hope I am misinterpreting this, but it appears that our credentialed music teacher will only be teaching for less than an hour a day with little to no other responsibilities. Thank you. Nicole Cushing. Please consider the objective of having students safely, physically present at school with a creative open air classrooms, at least for some part of the school day. Outdoor open-sided tents or other structures would facilitate a safe learning environment. In the likely event that we must keep virtual learning in place for now, increased class instruction is needed in order to keep the students curious, engaged, and accountable. Our children would benefit from a firm schedule set by the school to keep them on track. Real-time instruction, or at least a good deal of live teaching time per subject, is needed. Live virtual time to do work is also needed so that students can ask the questions they have while doing their work. More small group discussions between students can help facilitate accountability and their voice being heard over Zoom or Google Classroom. Music should be put back into the schedule with a live online teaching mode. PE should be mandatory and could be one of the classes that could possibly meet in person with activities that can be done keeping in mind social distancing. We would also appreciate being included in the ongoing conversation on how virtual class time will change from the former self-teaching model, which was of limited value, to a stronger teaching engaged model, and all other ongoing issues during this pandemic. Wen Zhang, with the worsening situation of COVID and no effective medical treatment available, I, as a parent, is strongly against any in-person classes or meetings throughout this year. I am glad to see the district is planning to offer remote learning opportunity and hope this will always be an option, as long as there are still concerns of safety and health of the children and staff. Anna Yakovlev, you need to fully reopen schools in person. One simple question: who will watch the kids if both parents need to work, not from home? You are completely failing our kids' education. You just don't want to take responsibility and want to make it easier for you. It's not about kids at all. Erin Chappelle, where can I find the definition of each phase? For example, phase 1, phase 2. When is the acceptance criteria to move into each, or what is the acceptance criteria to move into each phase? RM, what about children who have IEPs or resource time? Wendy Riggs, at the middle school level, I do not see an SEL check-in component. I would think that this group is likely to be more heavily impacted due to COVID and remote learning. In general, I feel this age group should be getting more SEL related attention. What is being done for middle schoolers and their mental health, resistance skills, and SEL? I know the wheel is offered to 6th graders, but not all 6th graders are part of the wheel. Okay, Jenna Lyons. Typically, elementary school children are able to get exercise on the playground, something that is incredibly important to their physical health. In the remote learning model, when will children have time to get outside for exercise? Same question for phase 1 in person. They have an hour to get home and eat lunch before afternoon electives rotations begin. My 2nd grader will not be able to sit and stare at a computer screen from 8:30 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. and this will affect her mental and physical health. Is this the expectation? Thank you. Erin Chappelle. Is there going to be any after-school care options for parents that can't support these schedules? I'll have 1 kid in kinder and 1 in 3rd. This schedule has me at school 2 hours each day for 1 kid. Should probably just work from the parking lot, and 2 days a week, half a day for the other kid. How does this work for working parents? Can I just stay home full-time with kids? This schedule isn't maintainable for parents that work full-time. We have 3 more comments that have come in while I was reading. I just need to reformat them real quick so I can see them, sorry. And we're almost done. Jennifer Stroup. I appreciate the thoughtful plan for not only our students, but staff as well. I have been stressing all summer about my children returning physically to school while numbers are skyrocketing. This is the safest model I see possible, and I appreciate the plan to eventually reopen if the numbers warrant it and stay open. This is so much smarter than opening, than closing, than opening again. This is not mentally healthy for our children. Michael Northrup, thank you for your time and care in developing school plans. I implore the board to adopt an online start. In light of recent surges in local COVID-19 rates in our county and the Los Gatos zip codes and the new World Health Organization report describing transmission by aerosolized particles via general breathing, not merely sneezes and coughs, I am growing less and less comfortable with the safety of in-person education, even if many health and safety interventions are implemented. Look to the example of Israel, where cases have skyrocketed in schools. Examples from other nations which have mitigated community spread aren't comparable, but this example, as well as the increasing cases associated with children coming together in the US, for example, in daycares in Texas, are instructive. Secondly, I'd like to ask about a particular scenario. While the county regulations mention a requirement for mask use, they also suggest not excluding students who forget or choose not to wear a mask. Has LGUSD established a policy for this? I am deeply concerned about exposure for staff and students if students forget or choose not to wear masks. Finally, lives should be the priority. I implore the board to prioritize the health and safety of students and staff. Thank you. Leah Petropoulos. Remote learning is okay. A 20-minute fool around Zoom call 4 days a week, which is what happened last year, is not acceptable. Are the kids going to get a full day class like the Marin County School District managed? If not, then my kid and my tax money are going to private school. And that is the end of public comment.
So Michelle, it was requested, since the LGTA represents all our staff, to finish that letter. I don't know how much more it was.
Certainly. I might have to backtrack a little bit. Okay. I might be repeating a little bit here, but there's a whole lot left. Yesterday, the association held school site-based town hall meetings, and we shared concerns about safety if when staff and students return to campus. We are in conversation with district leadership about these concerns and are hopeful that we will have more answers before decisions are made to move into in-person instruction in the future. With 4 weeks of summer school remaining, teachers are anxious to get answers to the questions relating to starting the year off remote. However, we are also appreciative of the dedication of the district to involve teachers in the pedagogical conversations. The Reopening Schools Task Force has been chasing a moving target from the get-go, and we've been resilient in our dedication to constantly ask ourselves, what is best for students? In short, the district has worked with teachers to find a safer way to return to school. To be clear, while many teachers want to go back and be with our students, myself included, we just can't do so and be safe. Safety of students and staff need to be a priority. We appreciate that the district administration acknowledges that we keep health and safety at the top of our priorities for students and staff. That said, we would love the board's support in prioritizing teacher safety, which includes a collaborative effort to identify clear criteria for our return. Thank you.
Thank you. We will, no other public comment. We will close public comment. And I guess open it up for discussion or further clarification.
So I don't know, should I jump in, or anybody else feel a strong desire to go ahead of me?
I mean, the only question I might have is whether, Paul, you wanted to do it. I mean, I know we technically can't respond, but I'll either ask the question. So about, you know, is there room for tents that are bigger than actual classrooms to provide the spacing? I think the answer is no, but I know Thomas has probably actually measured this.
Right. Thomas, you want to jump in there?
Sure. Yeah. So we did some measuring in the classrooms, and to do this for outdoor classrooms would rather be a tall task right now. The measuring of the classrooms that we did, we could easily fit 16 to 18 students in the classroom. So doing that outdoors, the logistics of bringing the tents in and out, bad weather, you know, things of that nature, we haven't really gone down that road yet. Not to say that we won't or we can't. It's just it's something that we haven't really looked at in depth.
But I mean, just the math. If you needed, in essence, each classroom would need twice the size of its current class as a tent or even an open air space outside. Yeah. We don't have the fields that actually would have 24 bigger rooms at Dave's or
no.
Right. I mean, it's just, it's not a question of money. It's just.
Yeah, it comes down to logistics and how big and how much space.
Well, and space infrastructure factor. We did walk the campuses and measure. The other component of outdoor spaces is cohorts then have to be 25 feet apart. So yes, You need
Oh.
to double the size of the class space to create 6 feet, and then add another 25 feet in every direction around that, which prohibits, we couldn't have as many outdoor spaces as we have classrooms currently. We do have space to have them have time outside, especially in a hybrid, to be outside or split inside outside to provide more space. Go out and do activities outside, but to create a completely outside space with those parameters for the extent of the day, I like tripled or something when we were trying to measure it out in between spaces.
Misty has also set up some very specific outdoor spaces for specialists and things to be able to do that. And so they'd be competing for the same spaces. And that's why we were concerned.
Thank you.
There's- and there's also, yeah, I was just gonna say with that, there's also like flow and traffic concerns too. I mean, I'm 25 feet sounds big enough to manage traffic, but I don't know if you'd need even more space beyond that. No, I just wanted to make a few comments kind of at the high broad brush level. I mean, again, having been involved in the discussions all along with teachers and staff and then seeing the community inputs, I'm generally bought into the plan, but looking forward to see what everybody else on the board has to say. One comment I have is I think, even though there's a multitude of opinions and all the public comment we got, I agree with virtually all of it. I mean, there's some parts about like you're too scared to go back to school I don't agree with, but yes, I'd like the kids to go back to school, but yes, I'm worried about the kids going back to school and, the safety of the teachers and everybody else. And I think that just illustrates what a challenging situation this is, right? There's no perfect solution and there's not going to be a perfect solution. I do think, there were a couple of comments that pointed out, well, what about Canada? And there may have been some emails earlier, pointing to some European countries. And so I did a little bit of research and, while those are great models, the reality is things are completely different here. The most striking difference being the fact that from the time that school got out first week of June until now, COVID infection rates in Santa Clara County have gone through the roof. They've gone from, I think, 25 a day to over 200 a day. Whereas in Norway and Denmark, they've gone from, 25 to 40 a day, and they've dropped by half. So the European model is awesome. Europeans can go back to school safely, I'm sure, but they're also doing something else within their societies in general to make the overall rate of infections go down and things more safe. And I mean, obviously, as we go forward, monitoring the situation when things are safe enough, I'm sure we'll revisit. The three things I sort of want to throw out there as we go through the discussion, I guess one is to make sure that whatever we do for remote learning, we really do nail it. What we had in the spring was, okay, not great. My own kids at the high school were, kind of good enough. But given that, this could be more than just the first month, and we're planning sort of full grades and all that, I want to make sure we invest whatever time we can between now and August 13th to make sure that we can really do a fantastic job with distance learning. Point number two, I think a couple of people raised the topic of special education and special needs kids. That's heard loud and clear. Same kind of statement for me. Whatever we can do to support them, differently, uniquely, all ears for solutions and all ears for supporting. And then the third one I think is, while the timeline that we have sounds good from August 13th to September 8th and September 8th into October, I would like to see some more specificity and clarity about when will decisions be made, when will they be communicated, will there be additional special board meetings to review changes of plans and all that. So if September 8th is, let's say it is good enough to go back to school on September 8th, at least under a phase 1 model, obviously parent communication a few days, a few business days before that would be ideal. And possibly even board meeting a couple days before that or a day before that would be good as well. So, and same for the October juncture. reasonable heads up for parents about shifting game plan and some board discussion prior to that. So that's it from me for now. I'll jump in, I suppose, if there's more discussion deliberation.
John?
Well, I'd like to applaud the staff for putting together a very comprehensive plan that addresses most everything that anyone could think of. I think we do need to follow the Santa Clara guidance. I don't think you can make everybody happy all the time. I think there are going to be people that are just going to try to second guess for whatever reason. We heard from a number of the public comment inputs that you have two parents that both work. They have a dilemma, and we just can't address all of those unique situations. But in general, I think that the plan is very good, and I think we need to do it very effectively and maintain communication above all, so that if there's any changes, we have to base our decisions on scientific facts and follow the guidance of the county, and just be very agile and be able to adjust to whatever circumstances. But I'm good with the decision to move on with the schedule that has been presented and just be very conscious of any changes that take place. That's it for me. Thank you.
Courtney?
Yeah, so I think it was interesting to hear all the public comments. I'm glad lots of people attended and decided to speak out. So there's clearly some disagreement amongst parents. Some want to reopen fully, some don't want to reopen at all, or rather do virtual and no virtual. And, to be honest, I disagree with myself at times. So if you had caught me on like about April 15th, I would have been like, I will do anything to reopen these schools. Because I'm one of those full-time working parents with a full-time working spouse. And so I hear you loud and clear. It really is hard to have the kids home. And so that's where kind of my personal desire goes. That being said, I think the rising caseload in Santa Clara County, not so much Los Gatos as of yet, but still climbing, is concerning. And we just really don't know that much about kids and COVID. So there's lots of stuff you can read out there in the New York Times about how kids are not at higher risk and more likely to be asymptomatic. But as a statistician, the fact that kids are way under tested it just means that you don't really know, like no one knows yet what the answer is. So I think that our current plan it errs on the side of safety, and I feel good about that. Because since we don't know and we are unsure, I think that I would prefer to be more risk averse, and I think that our decision or the plan to open first remotely is a good one. Although I will be crying silent tears on August 13th when I try to get my kids on Zoom, and also have meetings from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So I think it's just really tough. What I do want to stress and agree wholeheartedly with Peter is that I think if we start all virtual, it really needs to be better than the spring. And that doesn't mean that I don't appreciate all the effort that was made, and know that we were all scrambling and people tried very hard. But I think that, and it looks like we're going in that direction, right, with the schedule and everything, but it definitely needs to be more robust than we had in the springtime. So I think that's like loud and clear from the parents. I think that will also mitigate some of the concerns for the people who are trying to support their kids while working also from home. Because if there's a more robust offering from the district as far as instructional time and things like that, then that will free up some of their time. I also like the idea of having, as a data person, having more, they don't have to be like set in stone, but just more criteria specified beforehand about when we move to the other phases. It makes sense to me to not be wedded to a date just because we wrote a date down on a piece of paper. But you know, if we say like, hey, the cases have to be this number, or it has to be declining at this rate, or whatever we choose, I don't know what those things are right now. But that seems really sensible and smart. So I would be a fan of that plan. You know, I just want to say for the public that, you know, we have been communicating a lot with Paul and the district staff behind the scenes, and we have all been raising very similar questions. Can we teach outside, which we just talked about? Can we offer a virtual option to whoever wants it, and then everyone else who wants to be back in school can do that? And so, you know, we've been trying to make all this stuff work, and it doesn't always work. We don't always have the physical resources, the financial resources, and all of that. So we are doing, I think, the best that we can do, and I support the current plan. I will say that I believe Paul is planning to do more surveying of both the parent community and the teachers, just to get a current pulse check, because it seems like the pendulum has potentially swung. We did the parent survey, Paul, when was that? Like a couple months ago, about what people wanted, and the vast majority of parents wanted their kids in school. And so, you know, we were really trying to honor that request. And it may have changed now. I personally feel like I'm kind of, as I've described, my pendulum swing has come a little bit more back to the middle. So I believe we're doing that. And I am really curious about to learn more from the teachers about who wants to be virtual, who doesn't, and just get some more data and numbers. The final thing that I will sort of pose to the group is I don't think we can ignore our fiduciary duty, in the sense that I'm sure there are costs associated with some of this preparedness, whether it's like buying PPE or whatever. And so if we can stay on top of that, just to know what the implications are. I think we have seen some numbers from Trace a while back, but if we at some point in the next few weeks can get an update on the expectations based on the current plan, that would be great. So that's it.
Thank you, Courtney. Stephen.
It seems to me that the current plan is well thought out. It's tried to take into consideration all the various pressures from parents and teachers and students, and, you know, the state and the county and all. I was wondering if any consideration had been given to changing the academic calendar at all, starting later, maybe compressing in the spring, or you know, winter breaks. You know, if that was a possibility, just to, you know, move it a little bit further down before we commit to opening. Just a question. Other than that, I do support the current plan, even with you know, with the caveats that are in there for moving phase to phase. I think those are wise and will serve us well.
All right, so I'm going to sort of share information and sort of comment. I think one, I do believe in, part of this, the comments about criteria versus dates. If we were to have had this meeting a week ago, I think we would have been looking at something that was in-person instruction for half classes, if not full classes. There's sort of two iterations of scrambling by the task force, by the leadership, responding to, broader input from staff and not just teachers, but, teachers. I think the amazing work by Misty and Arcia and all the staff and teachers to come up with really workable plans that really tried to minimize risk and yet really protected as much, or sometimes even created additional teaching than they would have necessarily had. The example of kids basically getting a weekly art lesson from a classified or a certificated teacher, albeit remote, but yet that's more than they get now, by a factor of, like 10. And getting, PE instruction by a certificated PE teacher on a weekly basis at the, lower grades. So there were things that are actually really innovative and great. Some of the co-teaching model, I think, is really wonderful. Just thought of sort of the input from so many, different people or different educators who, would be sort of working outside their silo and yet still teaching their specialization and what they're best at as an opportunity. But so I know we've shifted a lot recently, and so the development of sort of clear criteria beyond just dates is something I know we will do and have a better take on this. And I think the county is they're not as nimble, but I bet within the next 2 weeks they're probably going to be going, everyone should start remote, because we're adding more cases in this county than all of Canada did today. So that's one of those things, and they're also much more spread out in smaller towns typically. I think one of the things that I think is in the plans but wasn't touched on is the need for dealing with our special ed and English language learners. It was sort of touched on, but I know those are some of the people you'll try to bring in even from remote, because they don't learn as easily in some of the the things. So I want to know that the community, they may not be detailed, but they're in process. And I know from the shaking of Misty and Arcia's heads that they are working and really have been aware of those communities from the day we closed. I mean, that was always one of the highest priorities. It's just very hard to do when you're not in person. I also know that we're trying to come up with programs for fragile families, which isn't just at-risk kids, but as one of the people I touched on, it could be a family member who is recovering from cancer, or a parent, or who's living in the household. And so we're, I know, and I think Paul can probably touch on it, but trying to address that situation and deliver services, and when we open back up, that wouldn't put those families at risk. And there was one comment that I think I just have to respond to, which is, that the union is refusing to teach, and that's not true here. Our union has been really supportive and giving great feedback, and I think they've been, as much of a part of the process as one could have ever asked for. Thinking of Nello, the math teacher at Fisher, and he's a guy who'd come back with scenarios, and he's done the math of how many could fit in this and how to subdivide it. Having had sub meetings, you're like, oh wow, that's a really creative answer. And so I think it's really leveraged. This has not been. There are times when decisions have to be top down, but yet I really have been impressed by Misty and Arcia's seeking of input and incorporating it. And Tim and Thomas, I don't want to leave you out, because you guys have also been really crucial to working with everyone. I'm sure just as that kinder electives are going to be part of the process, but trying to get them meeting in process, I know is, just part of the prioritization is that hands-on, because the kinders, just starting online is tough for them. They need that sort of personal instruction. I know Clubhouse is planning to be open they're going to have a more limited structure, but as I understand it, again, Paul, you could comment that Clubhouse will be available for aftercare. It may not be on a as needed drop in for everyone to come in and out, but for scheduled stuff, I expect they will be offering something. And the final thing is just to educate the public about we can't, and the law will not allow us to require masks for kids. We can strongly suggest, try to do it, but we can't force them, or we can't punish young children who would refuse. And, by saying you have to go home or you have to wear it. And so, we're hamstrung by the law, just as we can't subdivide with 20 college students teaching, because again, the law says you have to be a certificated teacher. And so, just as, some people want to be really flexible, and that's things that private schools can do, but we can't. We have an obligation. We have a minimum number of minutes that we have to hit. And the plans have come to give that level of instruction. And it's sort of pretty amazingly creative, while not having the mixing of, doing everything with the different, and trying to get still breaks and time for kids to, or teachers or anyone to use the bathroom is a real challenge. The one question I have, especially is, and I've raised it with Paul, is I really want to see us use these last few weeks to, sort of highlight the creativity of our actual teachers and maybe come up with stipends for them to develop some of the remote lessons. And I think that's something that Misty and RC have actually come up with, but I want the parents to know that we are doing that to make sure that when we start remote, it's not just winging it like we were forced to when we closed on a Friday. The teachers know a lot. They've had a lot of training. There's still more going on. There's tools that need to be chosen or prioritized so that they know what to do, how to do it better. But we can also, incentivize with stipends for some of those teacher leaders or our CIA to sort of come up with really great best of class sort of lessons. So every teacher has more tools. When they hit something they may not specialize at, they can pull it out and know how to do it well. So I think that's mine. Paul, I don't know if you want to add comments or responses to everyone's thoughts.
So Dan, if you don't mind, I just want to add one more quick thing that kind of ties together your last point and Courtney's point about the fiduciary responsibility, right? Which I sort of second your view of, we've got 4 more weeks. It seems to me to be well worthwhile to invest in whatever we need to do to get the teachers ready to nail the online learning. Back of the envelope, it will cost money. It will have impact. It will likely be, low 6 figures at most, not hugely detrimental to the budget of the reserve, I don't think. So for that kind of scope, I think it's well worth the diligence and the effort to make it happen if we can.
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay. All right. These were all great comments, and I just have some things I wanted to mention. First, Dan, I wanted to echo your comments about the union's collaborative efforts. They worked hand in hand with the district. They've been heavily involved in our work groups with Misty and Arcia, and we really appreciate it. What Diana said about our weekly meetings, and we all come from a good place and good intentions, and that's really appreciated. Stephen, you mentioned the question about the calendar, and for our district, because we're a K-8 district, it's a little bit more complicated because we always try to match up with the high school in their calendar, and so it involves more than just our district. That actually came up in a county discussion as a possibility of having all districts, like maybe start after Labor Day. But with COVID-19 expecting to continue on for a while, that was not looked on too favorably or even recommended by the county. Peter, your comments and Dan's about teacher work this summer, I know that we're on that, and we appreciate the work that the staff is doing. A comment about the remote learning. Arcia mentioned, I think he called it emergency teaching, and I think it was Mary Hellman that called it emergency trauma teaching. It's been called a couple of things. The remote learning is going to be different. It is going to be more robust. You probably saw on the slides from Misty and Arcia a more structured schedule, and also a different mindset, the mindset that it is required, and even small group instruction with teachers is required. Even that instructional block at the elementary, it gives a lot of flexibility. Teachers could assign work and then students go off to work and they report back at a certain time. So it's definitely going to be more robust. If it was only the same as last year, yes, we wouldn't want to start off that way. And granted, what the teachers did last year was miraculous, the way that they did it, but we want to take it to a new level. There was a question about masks. And what if a student showed up and forgot their mask? Well, we have thousands of masks that are coming into the district. In fact, I think Thomas may have picked those up from the county. There is a 60-day supply that the state has provided, plus we've ordered many additional masks and PPE equipment. And so if a student came to school and had forgotten their mask, we would provide a copy of the mask. I wanted to just give a hats off to the middle school work group and Misty for the co-teaching model. I'm pretty sure that that's probably really unique to secondary schools. And what's really unique about it is that it allows us to maintain a stable cohort, which is very difficult in a secondary school setting. And I just really appreciate the free flow dialogue and planning that's taken place. And I know that there's more conversations to follow. The question about working parents, Courtney, thanks so much for bringing that up. We are in conversations with Los Gatos Rec about clubhouse programs being on every school campus and expanding those if needs be. And we do have a few extra rooms at each school. Also, we've talked with Los Gatos Rec, and Therese has been part of these conversations with trying to prioritize our staff as well that have daycare needs. And I wanted to mention that if you remember, the Santa Clara curve really got flattened. And for a while there, we're thinking, wow, the shelter in place is like really working. And if we were at that point today, we wouldn't even be talking about beginning and distance learning. We would be, I'm sure, bringing students back in person. The surveys, we are, I think I mentioned earlier, we will have a survey link that will go out to the parents tomorrow when we send information asking for more information. And it will be an intent to return, and that will be helpful information for us to plan options. If there is a family that has a medically fragile concerns, we need to know that so that we can plan accordingly. I just fired down my list, and I want to thank everybody that's worked so hard. I know that there's different fields of thought on this, and I think it's very important that we come together as a community and work together to make this successful, and I know that we can. The one comment about the timeline, because I thought that was very good feedback that we received. And I wanted to mention that those timelines are only guideposts, and we will be looking at trends, and we will not bring students back. There's still concerns, and we definitely want those to show a decrease and a downward turn. And we'll be working with the county health department and the county office of ed for input on that as well. So that was just some follow-up, and really appreciate everything that the staff has done and all of the teachers that have participated on our work groups. I know it's been emotionally exhausting to do this, and especially working in such an environment of uncertainty is really emotionally exhausting. And it's really appreciated, all of the feedback, and especially the change, because it's like we wake up one day and then things have changed. And just in the last week, there's been different iterations happen, and it's a fast moving target. But I do think that it's important to maintain the safety and health of our students and our staff first. That's our primary responsibility.
You know, Paul, Wendy Riggs had brought up the SEL at Fisher and not seeing it, and I think it needs to be mentioned that, you know, it is actually part of it. It's why that health and PE core is part of the core 5 class rotation, was actually building in the SEL time, you know, and for that sort of healthy discussion. So it's really that their PE teachers facilitating that, not just, it isn't there, it just may not have been called out as SEL. It's also why part of every meeting when the kids come in staggered start, you know, they're coming into the classroom at the staggered times, but that's part of the time that they're touching base with the teachers, they're having the discussions. You know, sort of, it's not just show up and immediately start class, whereas, you know, before they all waited outside. Now they'll be sort of meeting in, you know, once they're reopen, is they're rolling in, you know, they're touching base, they're getting to know. And frankly, one of the great parts of this is building a core where they actually get to know their class really well, because they're together. And they'll know at Fisher one teacher really well, because they've got that person who now knows them, sees a lot of them, which could be good or bad. But you know, it's like having an advisor who will know them, know how they're doing on their classes, because they actually see them taking every other class. It's sort of a great inspirational model, which Paul was highlighting, which I think you guys should be, you know, recognized for coming up with, sort of solving a lot of things that people had talked about doing over the years, but never had the impetus or the the incentive, you know, if you wanted to make it sound positive, to make this kind of a change.
Misty, did you want to add anything to that with the SEL?
Yeah, I think it was born out of a conversation around 6th grade and a really heightened awareness for the 6th grade teaching team, that kids coming from a one classroom model into a middle school model, and possibly hybrid, and the different scenarios and things, that they really had an intentional focus there. And when we started to build it, we said, this is so good. How do we want to expand this to 7th and 8th grade? And with it, you know, every member of the task force has come with ideas, and members not on the task force. Melissa Weiss has contributed. Alicia Barton has contributed ideas. The electives team brainstormed. We had a 6th grade wheel and talked about how we could wheel team meeting, and talked about how we could incorporate SEL into that, and where we would want to distinguish that from what we're going to do in these cohort groups. So I think it's a very significant thread of every conversation that the middle school team is having. And by the end of this week, I think or certainly by next week, I will have met with every single department, and there hasn't been a department conversation that hasn't had a focus on SEL component to it. So it's, the teachers are really supporting it and being creative and intentional about including that as a focus. And I don't know that we've had a board meeting, Paul, since we found out that we received the grant for our mental health counselor. And so we will be able to do a mental health counseling position this next year. And we're also building in, similar to our elementary program where we do push-in lessons, and we're doing video content for some of those now. We're going to be able to add some of that to our middle school offerings, and looking at remote SEL content for their remote days, so that we can increase that.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what you said, Misty, LGEF wrote a grant to the El Camino Hospital Foundation, and they are funding $110,000 of that grant for a new school counselor. And then LGEF is going to top off that, excuse me, LGF is going to top that off so that it's a full-time position. And this will be a real blessing to the district to have a new full-time counselor. So, and thank you, Misty, for working with Deborah Weinstein on that. And it's really appreciated.
So what direction do you want from us, Paul?
So-
I mean, I think you've got a bunch of sort of action items and follow-ups, but
We have our action items, but I wanted to see if the board was supportive to move forward with our plan. And this is, you know, it's very fluid. We're going to be working on it and improving it, coming back and reporting back to the board. And we definitely have our work cut out for us, but I just wanted to make sure we were going down the right direction from a staff perspective for the board. And this includes opening and distance learning, and then our phase and careful phase approach.
Yeah, I mean, my take is I think you have that, right? And plus or minus some minor sets of inputs, right? There's no major objections and not even any major changes, I don't think.
yeah, I think it's just giving more detail. And I think, getting the feedback, through the community survey of, what mix of people would come back under a certain criteria, which helps plan how many kids are going to be in that phase 1, phase 2, and how we support the community best. I think we got the direction. It's clearly not an action item per se, because you've got a lot of actions already to do. But I know we have another meeting on the 30th, and clearly there'll be lots of other discussions going on long before that. So I know from a lot of the staff, we've had teacher input, and staff were then wondering, okay, great, teacher has a cohort but if someone's working the gate, they're interacting with 100 kids, and so that's part of Misty and Arcia meeting with those groups and showing them the PPE they have or the booths that will protect them. And everyone, I think, getting comfortable with the details so that, we can manage both the remote and the in-person part of this. And so that the parents who are concerned can understand, what risks are managed and how well, so that they can be comfortable engaging in sending their children back.
Well, we appreciate it, all of the input and feedback, and it's been a good meeting.
I think the one action item for today's would just be to try to come up with sort of what's the extra budget, and just some of the stuff I know, having discussed with Tim about like the TVs, they were in plans for the next 4 years. So they're not really any additional spending from our capital campaign or capital budget, but they're just would be moved up to make sure that everyone has the right equipment. We'd actually already approved the improvements to the Fisher network prior to this. So.
Can I just add one thing to that? Is that a lot of the things are already in our existing budget. We already have some planning, and we're just reprioritizing some of those things to see if they can happen immediately. And the only one other thing is that there is some potential from the state. There was a governor's discretionary funding that they have not finalized exactly how that's going to be allocated. So we're looking at that as a potential source.
Order of magnitude, what would that be?
That's the reason why I'm not comfortable talking about it. It looks like it could range from below 100,000 to well above that.
Is it specifically for something like PPE, or is it earmarked,
Yeah, there's 3 different buckets. One is for special education for low incidence type of students to help fund really heavy expense programs.
Yeah.
The second part is for learning loss, which is where I think it might be available for technology or for curriculum, professional development. And then there's another bucket that's for if you have In the LCAP, if you have supplemental or concentration needs, we have very little of that. So our funding in that bucket would be very small. But it is a significant amount if they agree on the funding as they're talking about it right now.
Yeah, funny. I don't think I'd seen anything about that. When is it due to be sort of?
They're going to do a new, a revised budget in August. So we're really not going to know until probably September because they missed the deadlines because the legislature closed down.
But the point is, so it's a budget process thing. It's not a legislative bill or anything like that.
That's correct.
Okay.
The budget. It's the governor's discretionary money from the Federal Care Act.
Okay, got it. Thanks. Yeah, that'd be great. I mean, obviously, regardless of what the district gets, I think statewide, getting more support like that from the state would be fantastic for all schools.
And just touching on the budget, I think it's something for the 150 whatever people who are still watching. We're actually pretty blessed that we are funded by our property taxes and by the generous donations to the home and school clubs and the foundation, which fund a lot of the extra people who will help with this. And we're not one of the communities that are potentially facing up to 10% cuts, which of course the state has said, well, we'll defer it to next year, which means they're still going to cut because you just are going to spend your money now, or next year's cuts will be more steep. And it was also put into the budget language that no one is allowed to release any employees, so making it also difficult. So, but we're going to, I know that's part of the plan is to, those people will help out in other ways. And so it's part of why we don't have to make cuts that a lot of places would potentially have to do. And we can keep the electives and keep a lot of the services. So anyway, that's about all. I think if anyone has any other comments, otherwise we will be together on the 30th.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.
Super. Thanks very much. Arcia, Misty, Paul, everybody. Thank you so much for all the hard work.
No kidding. Lots of time. Thank you.